Everybody, welcome back to Final Resonance TV and episode number 47 of Van Halen Stories. Today, we've got a special podcast for you. We're going to discuss and review Alex Van Halen's new book, Brothers, with the authors of Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, Brad Tolinski, and Chris Gill. And also with us today is Eric Senich from the Booked on Rock podcast, where Brad was just a guest talking about his new MC5 book that's out. And Brad, you want to give a little talk about just real quick about your book, and then we'll talk about it later too.
Sure. Yeah. Just a few weeks ago, I released a book called MC5, an oral biography of rock's most revolutionary band. And I know probably a lot of your people that watch your show, watch your podcast, are maybe familiar with the name MC5 or the term "kick out the jams," which was one of their big anthems, but probably don't know that much about the band because they've been defunct for many years. But it's really one of the most entertaining and fascinating rock stories that I've encountered in my many years of being a rock journalist. And to just give you a very short overview of what the band was about, so we can get on to talk about what everybody wants to talk about, which is the Alex book, is that we call them rock's most revolutionary band, and that sounds like hyperbole, but these guys in Detroit basically pioneered the sound of heavy metal, pioneered the attitude of punk rock, but at the same time experimented like with the free jazz of Sun Ra and had the sort of the stage moves of James Brown. So that made it a hell of a package. And on top of it, they were involved with the politics of the time. So it makes it a really exciting story. They were, just for playing rock and roll and having long hair, basically beat on by the police and thrown into in jail many times. And it almost makes me think like, oh my God, if any of the rock bands today had to go through what those guys went through just to play some rock and roll, they would never pick up a guitar in the first place. I mean, these guys were really in the thick of it, in the creation of now what we consider to be rock and roll, loud rock and roll played through Marshalls.
Right. Well, in case you guys don't know, I mean, Brad and Chris were on my podcast 3 years ago talking about their book. And Brad, of course, most people know this in the Van Halen community, Brad and Chris had a long relationship with Eddie Van Halen. And, Guitar World sort of had the exclusive, if I'm not mistaken, most of the time with him. And he almost never talked to anybody else. He did a little bit, I think, but not much, So, I mean, so you guys' story in the book, it's going to parallel quite a bit into this new book we're going to be talking about with Alex Van Halen's book. And, we'll get into the details. It's a pretty short book. That's one thing that hit me right off the bat. What do you guys think about the length of the book?
Wait, Alex's book, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this about our Chris and my book, Eruption, though,
Yeah.
before we get into it,
Yeah.
is that in Alex's book, Brothers, you get his side of the story. But if you really want a companion book where you hear Ed's side of the events, and they parallel, closely, but you get Ed's side, they really work as companion books,
Right.
I think everybody, when they first heard about Alex's book, were really geared up and thought, okay, this is going to be it. This is going to be the definitive inside look on, the makings of these records and things like that. And then we're like a little surprised to see how short it was.
Right. But
I think what Al's agenda wasn't to reveal every little last detail about Van Halen. It was more about, expressing his feelings, his personal feelings about his brother and the creation, and his father and the creation of Van Halen.
I kind of feel like it's sort of like a running commentary on other sources, like your own source, right? Because it's quoted a lot. But it's almost like if I was going to interview Alex Van Halen and give him a quote, he would give his side of that quote, whether he agreed with that quote or whether he had another thing to add to that quote. It was, Noel Monk's book was in there, your book was in there. The Nothing But a Good Time book is mentioned, throughout. And some of it, like, it weaved with your book because, like, I went back and listened to your audio book again because I wanted to kind of pick up on this part of it. Okay. And, it is interesting how it kind of weaves at times between the two of them. And there's this, like you said, synergy between the two books,
I think so. Yeah.
especially the early days, coming over. You had talked about his father's role during the war and that whole situation, and he weaves that in, but he also talks about, the family dynamic around from the family from the Netherlands and the family in California, and how that all was weaved together as well.
That was illuminating. I think that first chapter there was stuff there that I did not know. In large swaths, in large passages that I was like, okay, this is more than Ed ever talked about, and plus, we really didn't concentrate too much about those early days and everything, and even up through the club days, we didn't concentrate about that too much. And that's where Greg Renoff filled in the holes.
Sure.
And
right.
He was also referenced a lot. He deserves credit as well, for his contributions. I mean, he wasn't direct quoted or stuff. They weren't quoting the various fans,
Right.
that were there that he talked to. But that section for me was golden. That was really good. And that was just, I wish there was just a little bit more of that. But again, what does Alex really honestly remember? He unfortunately had, some substance abuse problems. And it's like when I talked with Ed about Van Halen too, how he just didn't remember this big chunk of history, but
I thought one of the more interesting things of the book in my head that I'd always sort of wondered about was the relationship between David and Alex.
Yeah.
Yes.
And,
that's fascinating to me.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And I think my vibe is, out of a certain kind of loyalty or whatever, maybe he felt like he had to, put a little edge on his relationship with David. But my gut was that he really enjoyed his time, with David, thought he was hilarious. And I can imagine those guys really sort of hitting it off, knowing Alex a little bit like I do. I mean, he portrayed Ed as being, hypersensitive and therefore having a lot more friction with Dave. But I got the sense from Alex that he really enjoyed most of his time with David. And I found that sort of fascinating.
I was pleasantly surprised by that.
Yeah.
I loved that. And I got the feeling that when I think he said in the NPR interview, Alex talked about decision making and how if Ed and Al disagree with something, then obviously they're not going to do it. If it's 50-50, they're going to do it. So I wonder that think about Alex had more of an influence on Dave's being in the band and maybe more of an influence on coming back to the band, because we always credit Wolfie with that. But yeah, I just thought that was so cool. Like they were hanging out together. He would go to martial arts events with Dave, and Dave would do the play-by-play. And he just got a kick out of him. Like and Jan, their father, was talking about the importance of having like that part where he's like, they're watching Liberace. You see that candelabra, that stuff's important. So Alex is like, oh, we got to get somebody who's a showman. And people come, like, I represent the Van Halen fan part of the audience, which Al addresses. And he's like, look, a lot of the people there, they're not musicians. So they're there to be entertained. So they're watching things.
Yeah.
So he knew that importance. And I wonder how much Ed pushed back on that with Al. Maybe they had arguments out there. Like, we got to keep this guy,
I have to interject because talking about the audience, it's like, my God, I've gone to see Pink Floyd so many times, and I've talked with other people who have gone to the show, and inevitably it's like, they had this floating pig. And it's like,
right.
What about his solo Uncomfortably Numb? What about this musical thing? What about the whole sound of it all? What about this? And it's just like, they had a floating pig, you know?
Right.
Like,
Are you saying that David was Van Halen's floating pig? Is that what you're suggesting?
Hey,
that
by
is
the way, do you guys get a David Gilmour vibe on the unfinished track in the beginning?
oh, okay. Hey, look, can we take a sidebar here and talk about
Okay.
that?
I
Sure.
love it. I love it. I
Okay.
can't stop
Okay.
listening to it.
Okay. All right. Unfinished. Um, Brad and I were fortunate to have this recording, not that particular one, a different recording, which we won't go into too much about that and where it came from and everything like that. But we've had it for like the last 3.5 years.
Can you at least tell us when it
Very,
was recorded?
no, we're very familiar with the song. And oh boy, I heard Alex releasing snippets of that, and I was like, oh, I know what this is. I know what this is. I know what this is. I actually had the wrong impression of what it was. I had come to the wrong conclusion of what it was. And I've shared some discussions privately with people, and I am going to come out here to talk to those people and say, like, I was a bit wrong. Not entirely wrong, but a bit wrong. Well, okay, Alex releases this stuff, and just a few weeks ago, I was talking with Steve Rosen, and Steve Rosen's like asking me some stuff. I'm like, oh, hey, let me send you a copy of the audiobook. And so I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, I'd love to check it out. I'd love to hear it, the actual recordings of Ed, even though you've kind of leaked them out there. But one of my most favorite things at Guitar World while I was there as an editor was in 1996 when Van Halen with Sammy Hagar fell apart. And we ran, Brad, you were a genius because you just let these guys go hog wild. We got this he said, she said thing going on between Eddie and Sammy Hagar. And gosh, that should just be a book or a movie unto itself. And even if it's just Ed talking and then Sammy talking, I could watch that. And I love that. So I made a beeline to this 1996 interview that Rosen had done on that because it's hilarious. It's like, we're working on Twister, man. And like, and Jan de Bond saying like, I don't want any lyrics to say anything about tornadoes or anything like that. And then I get from Sammy, it's like, sky's turning black, knuckles turning white, headed to the hot zone, and it's just like, and then Sammy comes back and this other writer comes back with Sammy's response, and it's just hilarious, to go back and forth but anyways, I'm listening to this interview, and 11 minutes into the interview or into the audiobook chapter of that, Ed goes like, oh, the song's called Between Us Two. Here, let me play you the intro. And he's got an unplugged electric guitar, and he goes, but it's on acoustic. And he plays it, and it's like, it's the chords. That's the opening. Like there's this little meandering instrumental interlude, and then when it really goes into the song, it goes into this acoustic guitar part, and that's the thing. And it's like, holy shit, it's Between Us Two.
Oh, wow.
Legendary song in Van Halen fan lore, because it's the song that basically led to the split of Ed and Sammy Hagar. That's when basically Ed said, like, I'm done with you. You're out. Take your bags. Don't even take your bags. Just get the F out of here. It's a legendary song, and it's never been released, and people have heard about it, and they've ruminated about it. And Ed had people telling him at the time, this is Van Halen's Stairway to Heaven. So Ed's super proud of this song, and it's like, he's all pumped up about it and everything like that. And he went through this whole thing where Glenn Ballard rewrote Sammy's lyrics, and Sammy got pissed. Actually, no, it was first Bruce Fairburn. Bruce Fairburn was producing it, and rewrites the lyrics, and Sammy gets pissed. Sammy's calling the song Closer to You. Ed wanted to call it Between Us Two. And then he goes to Glenn Ballard, and Glenn Ballard does the same thing. And Sammy's like, they're trying to make money off you by getting credits and all this stuff. And then they just got in this big, came to verbal blows, and they were done with each other. So we find out, well, and then Ed, of course, places this thing, and he says at the end, I've got an instrumental version of it. I'll play it for you. And it's like, clue, big, huge, there's the mystery novel whodunit clue, right there. So anyways, if I can mention Gary Sharon in this, when he joins Van Halen.
Yeah, I spoke a little to Gary about this when I was doing the interview for Eruption, in which there's everybody who's read the book knows that there's quite a quite a long discussion with Gary about his time in the band. And we spoke a little bit about that song, and it turned out that, yeah, that was a song that was presented to Gary
In
early
instrumental form.
in instrumental form.
Wow.
Very, when he first joined the band. And they just never ended up doing much with it. So that's where that came from. I mean, that was done before Gary entered the band. So it was probably
96.
As Chris is suggesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's between us two. So it wasn't done for a different kind of truth. I mean, come on, it doesn't even sound like it or anything. So it is Gilmore-esque. It does have, to get back to your point, it does have this different style. It's the style that, Ed was exploring, after Balance, exploring there on the Twister tracks that he did, exploring later when he did Van Halen 3, and of course, getting even more Gilmore-esque when he did the thing with Roger Waters.
Yes.
The more.
Well, I think even the soundtrack stuff that he was doing for the
Catherine. Yeah.
Oh no, that was later. Catherine was later, but
I know. But I mean, you hear
that continued. Yeah, he was using
that Gilmore sort of melodic kind of thing there,
the soaring phrasing and everything, and he was also using the Fernandez sustainer a lot. Then he picked that up really after Balance and started using it. He used it actually on Me Wise Magic. Is a song where he started using the sustainer. He pretty much, that. I always say this about Ed, man. Ed gets a new toy, and he uses it right away, and sometimes he sticks with it for a while, and other times he gets tired of it and moves on to something else. But the sustainer was Ed's new toy from 95 on through basically the 2004 tour, and then he kind of abandoned it. I mean, I think there's a couple parts of sustainer on a different kind of truth or whatever. But yeah, you were right about the Gilmore-esque thing.
Yeah.
Very much that. And it does date to 1996. That's when it was done.
Okay. That answers the question, because a lot of people are wondering, what's the origin?
I think Ed was sort of like at that time. I remember talking with him about the evolution of his playing style, or around that period, that sort of later Sammy Hagar thing. And Alex touches a little bit about this on his book. I think that Ed was feeling this weight of his history of having to, innovate and create, and what's the next big tapping thing and this and that. And Ed was sort of putting that on the side and wanting to explore more, about melody, about, working on those aspects of his playing. I mean, you even hear that on Van Halen 3, where he was, not so much about playing super fast or what's the next big tapping lick, but, how can I express myself more on an emotional level? Because I think he'd reached sort of a dead end with being the fastest guy on the block, or, the most, innovative. I think that those pressures on him to come up with whatever the next weird guitar technique, I think that started weighing on him. I don't know if he really had an answer to that, and instead he wanted to explore the more emotional aspects.
Well, he grew. I mean, he progressed. Ed,
Well, he progressed in a different kind of way than.
Well, yes, but Ed was always a progressive player. Go back. I mean, I'm hoping one of these days that we get that 1974 Pasadena High School, which has been out there, and you can find it on the internet. But Jeff at Van Halen News Desk has a really clean, near close to first generation copy of that, and I wrote up about it. You listen to Van Halen in 1974, gosh, they were very close to being a progressive rock band. At that point, the kind of material they were doing, Roth, Dave, however you want to call him, some people get pissed when I call him Roth, but, Dave is the one who brought this commercial, shorter pop songs, get the butts out on the dance floor shaking kind of thing. They were doing these really super long songs with these involved, changing arrangements, almost like Rush, pre-Rush, and the kind of songs they were covering, Captain Beyond and stuff. Those bands weren't even being played on
That's a great
FM
band.
radio at the time. I know because I grew up as a kid in Southern California. I was listening to the same radio stations that they were, and they were digging kind of deep and obscure stuff for their influences. And then Dave came along and took them in this other direction and everything. But that was always there with Ed. I know that because we talked, and he gave me just these hints of stuff that he was really the music that he enjoyed playing, the music that he enjoyed listening to was much more challenging, and
that's what you were hearing on 3, like
yeah.
more experimentation with textures and different sort of song formats. And to me, like in Alex's book, the other interesting thing that I found, in addition to like his feelings about Roth, was him talking, Chris and I have talked about this, about the pressure that Ed.
What do you got, Ed? What do you got?
And I think Alex ultimately felt that pressure was part of the thing that caused, sort of Ed's destruction or self-destruction. And I thought it was interesting to hear him talk about that because, I mean, for the most part, until maybe towards the end, Ed always projected this self-confidence, like I'm going to do what I'm going to do and, damn the torpedoes and everything. But there was a whole other, part of Ed that Alex revealed that felt pressured by his status as being the world's greatest guitarist, and I don't know, Eric, Jeff, I don't know how you guys felt about that, but I thought that was interesting.
There's a part of the book that when it's 06, maybe 06, 07, where he slams down something on the table to Alex, who's with his wife at the time. He's like, give this a listen. And he hits play, and Alex was like, man, that's pretty cool. Oh, was that your dog? And Alex was like, yeah, that's pretty cool, and he didn't really think much either way of it. And then he's like, yeah, see, your little brother can write on his own. Bet you didn't think I could do that. And then Alex looks back on that now. He gets emotional, like he starts to almost cry. Like, I didn't realize he wanted validation from me, because it's kind of like, you need validation from me? You're fucking Edward Van Halen.
I can attest to that. Ed he was
always looking for
validation. He was always looking for stuff. And some people might view it as ego and pompousness and stuff, but he really was looking for that validation and to be credited with stuff, and it's why they go on in pages, which I just thought my post-it note in that section was irony because he goes on for about 3 pages about people copying Ed, copying the striped guitar and everything, and all this other stuff that was taken from him and everything. And Ed got that stuff from elsewhere. He had an issue with Rick Derringer, and in this part I know is 100% bona fide true because I went and looked at the dates, and you can see where Derringer is the opening act. Because Van Halen's doing a short string of headlining shows in like the South and the Midwest, and then they do these big festival shows, and then they're up in the Midwest, and these 2 local bands are in the opening slot, and Derringer's up he doesn't do shows those 2 times that those bands are there, and then he does something in Chicago. So he definitely got kicked off for playing Ed solo. But by that same token, You Really Got Me, in the way that Van Halen plays it, comes from Rick Derringer. It's right there on Derringer Live. It's not credited on that album, but when he does his solo during Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, he goes into his long solo, which, by the way, includes tapping between him and Danny Johnson. They're both doing it. And I've saw those shows, and I saw the shows that, Derringer did in 78 and everything. But they go into You Really Got Me, and they play it exactly the way that Ed plays it on the first album. It's not the Dave Davies or Jimmy Page way of sliding the chords up. It's done with the first position A, and then, hitting the G string or hitting the G on the low E string. That's the way Derringer played it. So, there's no such thing as an original act. But I think Ed did want validation for things. And he was really, sensitive about that, I guess is the best way to put it. Like Alex, it says numerous times, Ed was sensitive, Ed was sensitive. And it's like, I wish he would have showed me more how Ed was sensitive as opposed to just saying it. But, I did see that quite a bit with him. You can see that in it's out there. It's the interview I did with Ed at the Fender factory in Corona when he did the Wolfgang guitar. You can see there's about 15 minutes. I wish I could get it from Fender, the whole thing. I have it all on tape and everything, but I don't have the video because they got a Hollywood film crew to interview him, and he looks great. It's like Ed's got this shirt, and the lighting's really cool and everything. And Ed's talking about stuff, and people saying, "Oh, he's bragging about stuff. He's bragging about stuff," but he's really trying to show people how dedicated he was to his craft. And I think he was like, "This is my chance to grab the literal spotlight and take some credit for what I've contributed to this community." Because you know what? Alex struggles, I think, with the fact that Ed was called the world's greatest guitarist. And at one point, he does admit that Ed indeed was the world's greatest guitarist. And everyone can argue day in and day out about who's great for whatever reason. A lot of people look at it from like what either hits them emotionally or how technical they are. Ed thought that Alan Holdsworth was the world's greatest guitarist, but I can tell you this, no one's conceiving a child with Alan Holdsworth music playing in the background, and if they are, I don't want to see that kid, because he's going to be a freak of nature, but they did the Van Halen records, and that's part of the reason why Ed's great. Ed's great because he impacted the entire electric guitar industry in a way that nobody has since the 50s. And even Les Paul didn't impact the industry that way. Jimi Hendrix didn't impact the industry that way. The Super Strat that right there behind you, the black and white, that came from Ed. And it was just a combination of pre-existing parts, but it was the way he put them together. And now there's any number. It's the boldest change in electric guitar design that has happened since the electric guitar hit the market in the 50s. Was the Super Strat. Now it's a style of guitar. And that was Eddie Van Halen. And it goes on and on with all he did. The fact of hot rodded amps like behind me. Ed drove that. Ed drove people into that. The build your own guitar phenomenon. Yes, parts existed. People were doing it. It took a figure like Eddie Van Halen to get people to say, like, I want to do that too. Replacement pickups, the same thing. You can go through a laundry list of the ways Eddie Van Halen affected the industry. It goes beyond his playing. People go, oh, the tapping thing was no big deal. Well, you know what? That was only a small microcosm of what Eddie Van Halen did. He did all this other stuff, just even the way we perceive tone, Ed has a lot to do with that, so he is indeed the world's greatest guitarist, and I will go on my grave.
Yeah, but we were talking about this the other day, and Ed was great. He was an incredible innovator, but along with that comes a tremendous amount of pressure.
Yeah.
And you've seen artists, you've seen this happen to artists time and time again, whether it was Axl Rose after the first two Guns N' Roses records where he couldn't stand the pressure of the follow-up, and it took them years and years to figure that out. Or I think even that kind of pressure destroyed Michael Jackson to some degree too.
Yeah. He's chasing that Thriller success.
Chasing that Thriller success. And none of us, I mean, that's really where, be hard for any of us to really kind of understand that kind of scrutiny. I think even to some degree, if you talk to Jeff Beck, he would say the same thing happened to Jimi Hendrix. He said that, the pressure of having to perform seeming miracles every evening, had a lot of impact on Jimmy and even earlier Eric Clapton, I would say, post Cream, it was almost like he had to retreat from that. He had to go back. So, to me, Alex captured a little bit of that. Alex didn't, Alex understood it. And even though Alex was considered a great drummer, he wasn't under the same sorts of pressures, and having to write the songs and come up with all this great stuff, So it was interesting to see, that sort of vulnerability being explored, but also, I think is true to some extent. Eddie had his issues, with drinking. And I think he would use that to escape. So it was harder, and he was more sensitive to Al, so it was harder for him to cope with that,
Well, I got that so much out of the book. I
Yeah.
wish there was more, like you say, but you just have to have some empathy for Eddie. This gives you an idea, of Eddie as a human being. He's, we forget that these are people.
Yeah.
And we are all under pressure at times with our jobs, with life, family, etc. And you see what happens when you're under that pressure. What happens when you keep applying pressure on something? It just snaps. There's no, and to imagine the amount of pressure he had day after day, year after year, constantly. I can't imagine what that, and I think that's what drove him to that period of his life where he just went, the dark period, he just checked out.
I spent quite a bit of time with Ed during that,
right,
we call the dark period.
Yeah.
And it is true. I mean, he was very vulnerable emotionally. And in fact, I did an interview with Ed and Billy Corgan one time, and it was right when the band was falling apart, and he was having his issues with Sammy Hagar.
You know that one well.
And Ed did actually, at one point, tear up, and it was really, you could tell it was an emotional moment that was weighing on him. And he did wear his heart on his sleeve, that's for sure. I mean, he wasn't afraid to show that sort of emotion to me and to Billy Corgan, who he had just met. But so that's not an exaggeration, and it was interesting to hear Alex talk about that. Hey Jeff, I was curious as to what also in the book stood out to you.
Well, you were just saying, Chris, the validation part of it, for like when you were doing the interview with him for the Wolfgang, did he, I mean, all the things that you outlined about his achievements across all of these different parts of the guitar universe, did he feel validated? Did he feel that? Did he know that? I mean,
I think he did feel validated. You know what the validation was? It was this,
right.
The EVH brand. No other artist has had their own full-fledged brand. They've had signature instruments and stuff, and people have tried to do like, Neil Schon had Schon guitars for a while, which, was here and gone in a flash.
Mm-hmm.
This has been around for what, 15, it's almost 20 years now, right, that the EVH brand has been around. Obviously its seeds were planted around 2004. You see the EVH logo on stage in 2004 on that tour. But so seeds were planted.
Personally, Jeff, to sort of answer your question, that I think it was his guitars and the invention and the effort that he put into his amplifier lines over the period of those three companies. That was, in Ed's mind, I believe, his, this is a little bit of clunky analogy, but that was his tapping. That was his new
his new focus.
Guitar technique.
That was a new way of expressing his creativity.
That was it. It was exactly, that's a great way of putting it, Chris. He saw this as an important part of what his legacy was going to be.
And his son.
The ultimate amp, to build the ultimate guitar.
Yeah. I mean, to get off, but his son too was like, my gosh, Ed was the proudest father you could ever imagine, And I can tell you this, even though Ed was probably as much of a problem as John Van Halen was. Wolfgang didn't beat up his dad, so
Not that we know of anyway.
there was genuine love and respect and everything, and it was tough love at points, and Ed deserved the tough love, but no, to get back to what you said, Jeff, yes, I think he was, aware, and I think he did feel validated. I mean, it was really more in the early part of his career, but he was also young and a little bit oblivious and the industry was also just the fucking Wild West back then too. I mean, you want to talk about, fair use and plagiarism and copyright violations, man. The guitar industry in the 70s. I mean, look, we had the whole Japanese, lawsuit models and everything going on and everything. And we still have a little bit of that going on today, but it's a lot more few and far between. But when Ed was out there, it's just like, I went to NAMM and I just see all these striped guitars everywhere. And I think,
but it is interesting, right? That Ed, I think Ed, in a weird way, felt more validated about his technical innovations than he did his playing in some ways.
Right.
I think so. It's true. Yeah, because I think I almost find like Ed was insulted, and not insulted in such an egotistical way, but insulted in like, hey, dudes, I came up with my own thing. Come on, guys, come up with your own deal.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He was a little annoyed by what he had the other Frankenstein.
Yes, exactly.
Which were these shredders.
But that's what pissed me off as a fan when you hear people say, he's doing all that stuff, and I'm like, you're not listening.
Yeah,
you're not listening to the whole body of work. You're not listening to, like, I was listening to Aftershock last night. It's just like the solos are a song within a song, and his texture.
Well, it's funny. Somebody sent me
he does.
Somebody sent me this video a few days ago with of Freddie King playing, and it just knocked me out. I mean, like Freddie, not because of the speed or anything, but the sheer weight of Freddie's playing on this clip. It's Freddie King, great blues man for people in your audience that aren't familiar with him. Just the sound that was coming out of his amps, like, it was just made me so excited. And to me, that was the thing that's, separated Ed from his competitors, is not just the technique, but the sheer weight of every note. That's what's really impossible to imitate. And God bless Joe Satriani. He's out there playing. But even Joe, when you talk to Joe about Ed's playing, he's like, that's the thing that's hard to, copy or imitate, is the sheer power and sheer intent and intention of the note.
Yeah, I hear the sensitivity in his sound, where you get this part of him that's very emotional, sensitive, almost music that makes you want to cry. But then there's those parts where he's now like screaming with a guitar, like it's just all coming out of him.
It's that Jimi Hendrix thing, I chopped down a mountain,
right,
at the edge of my hand,
Yeah, you could
I've told this story many times. My first impression was, and this is one thing I love that I came to discover to hear later, was the very first time I heard Van Halen on the radio was after my parents' house was being flooded, and I was out with them digging up a stream behind our house that was overflowing and coming. And I just finally gave up because I said, every time we dig up dirt, it just washes right back, and I said, I give up, I can't anymore. And I go into the house and I turn on KMET Los Angeles, and they're playing When the Levee Breaks, by Led Zeppelin, and I'm pissed off. And then the next song that came on was You Really Got Me. And that's the very first time I heard Van Halen. And out of all the stuff on the first Van Halen album, it's probably one of the least flashy songs on it, but I just heard that guitar riff, and I was familiar with the Kinks version of You Really Got Me. I was familiar with Derringer's version of You Really Got Me. And even if Ed was playing the same thing, Derringer's version didn't sound anywhere near as blow your fucking head off powerful as Ed's version did. And Ed does a good solo on it, and he even does the tapping, and you don't even really recognize it as such at that point. I mean, it was Eruption, and all of a sudden that you were just like, holy crap, what was that? But I was bowled over more than anything by that song, by the sound of that guitar.
Yes.
That was
sound.
that was just like flipping Martians from outer space with advanced lasers coming to destroy the fucking Earth and burn it to ash.
But Ed didn't like it though. He said that,
right in the book
like,
they're talking about that.
Too much reverb.
Right. Him and Al were listening back to it like, no, this is
reverb. That's not what we wanted.
That's what gets me, because you know what, I mean, Al's side came from him, but what Ed said about it came from me talking with him about that. And I want people to read that whole fucking story from Ed. It's great. Read Al's side, but read Ed's side, because you're going to be even more illuminated and informed.
Chris, he said he didn't remember a lot about two, but did he recall the fact that he was happy with how it sounded? Because in Al's book, they're really happy.
No, Ed was not happy with the way he sounded. I mean, that's the thing.
On two, though, they were happy with it, weren't they?
They were much more happy with the sound than, I think Ed was never really ever 100% happy until 1984. I think that's really when Ed came around and everything, and he had there's moments of fair warning too, that those two albums really stick out for Ed.
Because Alex says two is like, that's what we wanted.
Yeah, what do you guys think about it? Like, it's sort of interesting to me. Like, so all the early Van Halen records, right? They were banged out in a couple weeks, and they have that sort of spontaneous energy. And then you do get to 1984, and it takes them a year to make that record. Now, granted, 1984 is a great record, but one has to wonder, and maybe this is where you get Ted Templeman and David Lee Roth's side of it. Is like, did it really need to take a year?
It's a quick album. Yeah. What's the total time on 1984? It's like
35 minutes or something.
Right.
Like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, anybody here wish he would talk about In the Midnight Hour? Alex didn't talk about it.
Yes. I don't even the great thing about that talk that he did in Los Angeles was when he had an audience. I don't know how many people were there, but when he said he is going to entertain the thought of releasing some of this stuff from the vault, and people went nuts. And it's like, Alex really needed to see that, because, when you look at a few people on an internet forums talking about it, it's one thing, but to have a room full of people and that energy that they're throwing at you, I think that burned the fire with Alex and motivated him to get out there and dig into the stuff. But yes, my gosh, they keep on talking about this stuff, and all of us fucking nerds out there know there's a lot more stuff out there that's done and ready, and everything. There's a whole second album that was turned down twice by Warner Brothers in 1999 with Gary Sharon. There's, various tracks, especially once they had 5150. I think the problem is that, the singers on that stuff, it's Sammy and it's Gary, and that just doesn't sit really well within the camp, and there's not a whole lot from 1984, but we know there's more. When
I was at 5150, and Chris will probably attest to this as well, but I mean, there were literally walls
covered
of CDs, and recordings. Steve Vai, actually, when I was interviewing him for the Eruption book, said that, he went over to 5150 one day, and Ed was playing him stuff that was sort of, that was just blowing him away, him and Alex. And he was like, why don't you put that out?
And this is the thing, because I brought that up to people, and people's like brains explode when I tell them that, because Steve Vai was blown away by this stuff.
Yeah, Gary
out there.
Gary actually played me a track from those days where there was, a song, and then there was like, this long improvisation where they just let the tape roll. It was just basically Alex and Ed going off, know, and it was, for a good like 4 or 5 minutes, and you really got the sense of what it probably was like in the days of Mammoth,
right.
Guys would just go to town, and you're like, a lot of people would like to hear that.
Yeah, but I think it would take a while to go through it all because they just said they let the tape roll. So there's tons and tons and tons of stuff.
And here's the thing, Alex, you don't have to do this yourself. Get somebody,
Right.
get Brian Kehoe, get somebody,
Yeah,
another guy.
Chris Gill.
Chris Gill,
Right, Chris Gill.
Hey, I'll take that job. I'll do it.
Jeff
I'll do it
Goebel,
minimum
Eric
wage.
Senich.
I'll do it for less than minimum wage.
We're there.
But yeah, it's like there's plenty of people out there who are willing to go through this stuff and filter it down for you and present it to you.
Yeah.
You don't have to take on that burden yourself.
Can I assume you guys haven't heard In the Midnight Hour? Has anybody listened?
Never heard it.
Oh my
Never
God.
heard
It's
it.
completed, I guess. Finished, mixed, the whole thing.
It was the first thing they did. It was a concession.
Wow,
David
man.
Lee Roth, once they built the studio, once they finished up 5150, Jump was in the works and everything. And that was, but the next thing that they did basically, but they did Midnight Hour as a concession to David Lee Roth to make him happy, to say like,
Right.
look, Dave, it's Ed's studio, but we're going to play ball with you.
Like it's given the brothers' proclivities, and that Ed and Landy were mucking around for a year on 1984. Damn well, I mean, whether it's instrumental or otherwise, that they're.
Did you guys know that Jump came out of the end of Hear About It Later? That's what Alex says in the book.
No, he said it was basically it wasn't the end of it. It was basically like based upon
Right.
similar chord structure, basically.
Yeah.
Like now that I've heard that, it's like that makes a whole lot more sense than Kiss on My List or whatever the hell they're trying to say. Ed allegedly, when Ed was probably shit-faced drunk and trying to win over Daryl Hall.
One of the many almost singers of Van Halen.
Eric, did he say that was the intro or the outro of that?
He said it came from the ending part of Hear About It Later, that the chord structure, it was played off of that.
Okay.
So the journalist in me wants to ask you guys, go around, what isn't in Alex's book that you guys really wanted?
I wanted to talk about
Eric,
that.
what did you really want to?
Yeah,
maybe wasn't in there.
Well, for starters, I would want the Sammy era. I would want to. I want to know more about the Sammy era because it's important, and it's not like he was in the band for a few days. They did quite a bit of great work with him. But I would have, just as somebody who loves the minutia and loves to find out what's in the mix, what's in the sauce, is how those songs were written and produced and created more. But I get it. That's not what the intent of the book was. But I would have loved to have gotten more of that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I would have wanted. More on 1984. It almost seems like, and guys from the DLR cast mentioned this in their podcast, Steve Roth and Darren Paltrowitz, who wrote the book on Dave. It was almost like they get up to Diver Down, and they had to, almost like on a time constraint thing, just finish the book up, because it's like there's less on Diver Down in 1984 than there are on the stuff prior. So I would have wanted to read more about that, because that's just such a huge era and a peak of that band. So I think that those are the ones that stand out for me.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. More on the material.
Right.
Fair
How are they written?
Fair warning, of course. I mean, everybody wants to know about fair warning. Obviously, we want to hear from Don, right? I mean, everybody wants to hear the details from Don.
Right.
They did have Don. I talked to Greg Ranoff because I said, Greg, it looks like a lot of this stuff was lifted from your tape op interview with Don. Don said,
great.
Don said, like, I checked, and it's like, no, it looks like they actually did an interview with Don.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And again, I wish, instead of relying on all these other things that are already out there, I wish they would have done a little bit more of like, let's get more from Don.
Yeah.
Let's get more from some of these other people that are Michael.
I have to say, like, and I know this has been a sore spot with a lot of Van Halen fans. I just don't like a little bit more about their relationship with Mike Anthony. I just can't believe it's as bad as they leave it to be. They lead it to be. Like, was he really that much of an anonymous person in their life, in their world? And I don't even think Alex calls him by his last name.
No, he does affectionately call him Mikey, which
he calls him. He just starts talking about Mikey, and it's Like my standard joke is I think he actually mentions me and Chris more than Mike and
Yeah.
So like look, he was an important guy and he had to
Very.
have been a friend. I mean,
Yeah.
okay. Maybe he didn't mix it up or
I,
but
I wanted to
If you
add
guys
to
go back,
that.
if you guys go back to like Rosen's book, where he's interviewing Ed and he's talking about Mike, there's a lot of detail in that
Oh
about
yeah.
Mike, which is illuminating because Ed's very kind to Mike in that interview, actually. And he, the only thing that he was always talking about was, and you guys know this, of course, is that Mike didn't contribute. And he always was like, wanted him to contribute or something. And I don't know.
But did he really?
They would have hated his
Right,
guts
right.
if he had.
Sure. And how many bands have that scenario? Pretty much
Right.
every. I mean, not every member of the band is going to contribute to the songwriting.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that
Right?
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah,
want to
I
add
mean,
one-
that's what I find funny about it. Like if they would have had another strong personality in that band,
wouldn't have worked.
it would have been
Sure.
mayhem,
I mean,
So
You can see the
like-
resentment if he's getting a quarter of the publishing. I get it.
yeah,
But he's a team player. He was
Right.
Sometimes the roles are different. I mean, this is the one thing that ate me up in the back in the author's note where he kind of disparagingly refers to us in this vague way as Van Halenologists, and he has mixed feelings about the books we've done because we weren't really there. And it's like, but Alex, Brad and I were there. We spent many hours
Right.
with Ed.
Ed was there.
Ed was there.
And he,
Steve Lukather was there. Tony Iommi was there. Michael Anthony was there, who we all talked to for our book. But, Brad and I were there. I spent days at a time at 5150. I talked with Ed for 3 hours about the Wolfgang guitar. I talked with him for several hours about the 5152 amp when it came out. I talked with him about 70 of the guitars that he had. I talked with him about this, that, and the other. And then just from a fanboy perspective, I was there since July 8th, 1978. Actually, I was there earlier because I was there the same time as you and your brother hearing Van Halen on the KMET radio for the first time at 2:00 in the morning. I wasn't there physically with you guys, but I was there in the greater world. And I followed your journey and I observed your journey and I goddamn studied your damn journey beyond any PhD degree level of study. I can tell you exact dates, and stuff. And I had some struggle to remember my daughter's own birthday. But I can tell you the day that they left Nijmegen, Holland, and came to the United States. And I can tell you the day that they arrived in the United States. And I can tell you for damn sure that Eddie Van Halen was 7 years old when they came to America, not 6, as it says in the book. So I was there with you guys in a whole different level. So don't discard us. We were there. And at one point I did want to get back to the earlier thing though about what do you wish was from Alex's book that wasn't there. And for me, and I realize this is for the general fan out there who, probably needs a little bit of Van Halen for Dummies repetition, and needs the story told all over again because they've forgotten it, over how many margaritas and Cosmos and light beers. But I wanted to get, because the book was called Brothers, I wanted to get more about what was it like for the Van Halen brothers away from the band Van Halen. What was their life like, as fathers? He alludes to that a little bit, the responsibility that, your life changes once you become a father and everything. But I wanted more of that. I wanted to know, what did they do? There wasn't a whole lot of downtime. I mean, it was pretty much album tour, and that consumed their lives. But what was it like for them? Did they ever have maybe a deeper conversation about stuff? What stupid stuff did they talk about? Did they bond over cars? They should have, because Ed had his car collection and Al had his car collection. He even talks about Ed beating a Porsche, just in how he's such a big fan of Porsches. I would have liked more of that, more insight into what his personal relationship was like with his brother. I don't really need to know, some the broader details about the albums, and I don't need to know about the groupies and the drugs and all that stuff. Noah Monk's book goes into far too much detail about that. And I wish that he would have done, because he kind of mentioned when the book came out that he was going to do this setting the record straight thing. I didn't see enough of that. He talks about Ted Templeman's book with Greg Renoff, doesn't mention Greg Renoff, but he talks about the Ted Templeman book and says like, oh, I don't agree with most of what Ted Templeman said, but I agree with him about this, where he compares him to Coltrane and so on and so forth. Right. But it's like, well, let's have a little tit for tat, Alex. Let's tell me what you didn't agree with in Ted Templeman's book. I want to know about that. I want to know how he felt about Noel Monk portraying his brother as this idiot savant, in Running with the Devil, because he talks about this stuff about Ed not knowing that a girl can't get pregnant when she gives you a blowjob. I mean, yeah, Ed was smarter than that. He was already 22, 23, 24 years old at the time. I'm sorry, but I didn't know Eddie personally then, but come on, people.
Well, it's interesting about Ed, people have asked me through the years, like, about what was it like to interview Ed and talk to Ed. And I mean, Ed had sort of fun, like with a little bit of his, like, I'm just a regular guy kind of, attitude. And it's part of why we loved him, was because, he had a really good sort of common man touch, in his interviews. He was always really super, super personable. But at the same time, I mean, I interviewed a lot of guitarists in my day, and I talked to Ed a bunch. And what always really impressed me, like on some level you might think, well, I don't know if you should be impressed with, but he always had a point of view. He always had a rap. He always had really distinct ideas about what he was trying to accomplish on any given record. Much more focused than most guys that I talked to. Like each record represented something very distinct, and it shaped our views about what we think about those records. And he was always super clever on how he presented that information. So I guess my point is that Ed was no dummy.
He was no dummy.
He was pretty savvy,
Yeah.
And like I said, always really had like I said, a story and a point of view, and knew what he was trying to accomplish on any given record. He wasn't the dopey guy that
right.
Noel Monk.
I want to add to that too, going back to those, that 1974 recording, that you hear the music that they're playing and the stuff that they were listening to. They were digging deep. They were digging deeper than a lot of us were, as far as the bands that Ed was listening to. He knew about Holsworth before most of us did. Even though I know that they did open, UK opened up for Van Halen pretty early on, but I think Ed was already onto the guy before that. He knew about this stuff. He was a lot more, really of a musicologist than people realize, because people always look at when he starts just talking about, it seems like he's dropped with Peter Gabriel's So. And maybe he did, because he was just doing his own thing. But, before that, he was building up a foundation, unlike most of us, when we get into it. And I think what happened was when David Lee Roth came into the picture, they dumbed down. They went for this more lowest common denominator type of approach and everything. And I think Ed kind of bought into adopting that role and portraying himself as kind of this happy-go-lucky everyman and everything like that. But Ed was much smarter, was much brighter about.
Oh, look at all you have to do is look at forget about the words for a second and just look at his accomplishments, and how deeply he considered each aspect of the guitar and amplification, and when we read Ed Van Halen interviews, right, we're all sort of entertained by them. It's part of like what, in many ways, it's sort of like Dimebag Darrell from Pantera, like Dime, like you would sort of think on the surface he's like just this dopey heavy metal guy or whatever, this guy with the beard. But Dime was super clever. Like he had his, you know, all this different slang that he invented and turns of phrases, and always really fun, and had a way of bringing us into his world. And that I can tell you, you know, there are very few entertainers, very few people who have that ability. And Ed was one of those guys. I mean, and I don't want to say it was calculated, you know, because it was an extension of his personality. But the fact that, like Jeff, I know you, Eric, you know, you guys have probably read these interviews with Ed like 50 or 60 times.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you're entertained by it.
And
You
watching
know,
him on
it's not just
YouTube.
the
Yeah.
information, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was fun. He was super smart.
I
you know.
love watching the videos of him working on the guitar, and when he's talking about the new EVH, and then you just see him light up. Like he's just he's just
For me, there wasn't
There's a
enough
lot of brain going up.
yeah, he's talking about this pickup here, what you can do with this. It's like it's like you're watching a scientist at work.
when they finally put out those videos, you know, for the 5150 Stealth, that was like one of the coolest things to have the
Yes.
GoPros and have a real look inside. You know, I don't think we ever.
Is that the one where he's like going through the factory, kind of walking through, and they're showing
well,
him
no,
all
actually,
this
when
stuff?
he's at 5150 and he's playing. You know?
Okay. Because there's
And
one too where he's going through. They're
That was me.
constructing it.
That was 2009.
Okay, I love that
Actually, it
one
was actually
too.
2008, but it came out in 2009.
Just
It was like
overseeing
probably like
everything. Yeah.
Hey,
December,
Chris,
but
let me
yeah.
ask you about that when you were walking through the factory and everything, and he's talking about giving people heat or whatever. Is that was
Yes.
okay? He would say this thing like, I would become Eddie Van Halen when I was trying to be, you know, assertive or whatever. Is that something that you remember, or is that just something I picked up?
Yeah, I remember. I mean, that whole day was kind of magical because it's like, man, I'm just, you know, we're here, you know, the guitar's done, and as I described in the article, they just had, you know, various iterations of that model on its progress and all these parts around, and you know, we went around, you know, this tour of the factory. It actually was funny because I think one of my early drafts, I kind of mentioned about a Spinal Tap moment because we kind of got separated, and the factory's pretty damn big. You know, and it was just like I'm waiting for the little black man going, it's just a jog over here, then you turn right, and then you go left, and whatever, and then we come back around. It was like, because we went through the paint booth, you know, and they have the curtains hanging down and everything like that, and went through the paint booth, and we go around the singing, we go through this whole maze of everything, and then we end up back in the paint booth somehow, you know. And it was just like, but yeah, it was really, you know, I guess the worst thing was that's the last I saw Ed smoking, and he was smoking a lot. You know, and it looked really cool. In fact, he liked when he was there with the cigarette and the lighting was on him, and he looked like Ray Liotta, you know. And I just said, it's the Scorsese effect or whatever, because I think they were complaining about his cigarettes, you know. And I said, oh, fuck it, it's the Scorsese effect. It just adds to the ambience. And it's like, I like.
But Chris, I mean, you know, like you talked to him and you did the factory tour. Wasn't it always like, it felt very natural?
Oh, completely. There was,
but you know, you've talked to a lot of guitar players too. It's interesting. Like Ed always had his rap down, though.
oh no, completely. Ed
It wasn't like you had to get 10 takes to get information out.
no,
He
not
had
at all.
this very clear view of every stage of his career and his playing. Maybe he didn't remember everything, but he always understood. He always had an artist's view.
But
Absolutely.
it seems like he knows what you wanted as a journalist. He got it.
I've always said the hardest thing in art is to make a decision. And Ed made his decision. You know, like usually bad art is like somebody not really knowing the direction or not completely understanding what they're going for. Ed, you know, whether it was while he was doing it or after, and he could step back and look, he always sort of got it and was always able to articulate it, and often in an entertaining way.
Yeah.
And it's you know, we love his playing, but we also love the persona, and we also love the guy. And all I'm saying is, like, in some ways, it's weird because, again, Noel Monk portrayed him as sort of idiot savant, as Chris was saying. But even Alex, I don't feel like Alex gave his intelligence enough credit. Like he talks about the emotional quality of Ed, but I wonder if he really understood just how smart and entertaining his own brother was.
Yeah, well, Ed always blew me away. He did just some little side reference he would talk, and usually it was when we were off the record. It was like a thing, but he would reference something culturally or some film or something like that. And
That's what I want to know. Yeah,
Ed,
because he was an athlete, him and Al in high school, pretty good athletes. Did he talk about baseball, football? What did he have teams that he followed?
What about that? And it's like. But he would reference things, and it's like, this is the Eddie Van Halen. I mean, he blew me away times where it's like, wow, I would not have thought of you to be into that.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny too, because when Chris and I did Eruption, we could have done it we could have written prose style. We could have told the story in that kind of way. But the truth is Eddie's best, in a way, his best. I'm not coming up.
Well, I'll take over. I know exactly what you're trying to say here.
His best representative was himself.
Exactly. And this is why his own words, and everything. I mean, and that's the only reason why we had those introductory segments. It was just to fill in a few of the blanks where we just didn't get to talk with him about certain subjects, and we had to kind of lay that out for people to kind of fill in the holes a little bit. And some people says it might have been repetitive. And it's like, well, yes, but we're setting up the scene here. We're setting up the scene. It's like in a movie where you have a flashback or something like that. That's kind of like what we were doing. I mean, that's why a lot of the chapters start off with these scenarios.
I always sort of thought, with Eddie Van Halen interviews, I wanted to get out of the way.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be like the journalist that said, okay, here's my interpretation of what Ed Van Halen has to say, because he was always his own best spokesman. I mean, it was more entertaining that way. And then you guys as fans, that's really what you wanted to hear. I mean, you don't know if you really wanted to hear me or Chris bloviating, you wanted
I think, again, but I do want to come back to the skill of an interviewer, and what I had to do with Ed often is sometimes you needed to direct him a little bit. And sometimes he would not give you much detail, and you had to pull stuff out of him. But once you got him going, and it wasn't just sitting there and turning the tape recorder on. You did have to have a conversation with him. But I think that's why I gelled with him so well, because I'm going to brag, here, but I knew my shit,
Yeah. Well, he knew that. He knew that you knew your shit.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Especially when it came to talking about guitar stuff, because I'm a before Eddie Van Halen and concurrently with my digging into Eddie Van Halen and their lore, I'm also a vintage guitar nut, and historian and stuff. And
I get the feeling he would want to talk to you. Like, it would be hard for you to leave. He'd probably want to chat with you all night.
Believe me, when I was up there in 2013 doing the Guitar Aficionado story and his guitar collection, that was like, it was really hard for us to split apart from each other.
Yeah, to wrap it up.
That I had to cancel.
I want to know if did he make you guys feel welcome as journalists? Was he comfortable to be around, especially the first time you interviewed him? Was he intimidating? Was he awkward?
I got to tell you my story on that, because, man, I'm at Guitar Player Magazine. It's November 1994. I'm doing an interview with Ed on the balance thing. I had to fight with Jazz Obrecht and this other jerk, who I won't mention by name because he doesn't even get the respect for me on that.
Chris needs to get his own podcast. Do you have one? You got to get one.
But I
didn't know you felt that way about me.
No, it's not you. It's not you, Brad. This is a Guitar
Present
Player
company
Guitar Player.
Okay.
This is before I left Guitar Player, because you guys had the real access. Because Guitar Player, our access was diminishing, and Ed was going over towards Guitar World, because you guys were doing the job. You were doing them justice, and that's a big reason why I left Guitar Player Magazine in the first place.
I would say you don't want to talk to those nerds.
I'm sorry, Brad, and we have the photographic evidence, but Ed did once refer to you and Greg DiBenedetto as those hair helmet guys.
Is this before he met you, Brad, or
No, he knew Brad, but he was commenting about something. But anyway,
He wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong.
I don't want to go off too far, but basically, I had gotten the gig that I had wanted basically since
I wish I had the hair helmet again.
Yeah.
but I got the gig and I wanted it so bad because when I got the job at Guitar Player Magazine, that was my priority number one. You know, it's just like Shohei Ohtani wanting to win the World Series. Okay, I was like, I wanted to interview Eddie Van Halen, and I had these two other guys standing in my way, but I was diligent and I landed it. And so I show up. Oh man, it was such a great experience. I mean, it starts off. I stayed at the Riot House, the Hyatt Hotel in Sunset, and I'm getting in the elevator. I had just been at Warner Brothers the day before, and I'd listened to Balance. You know, they didn't even send out an advance, so I had to go into the office and listen to it. And I always hated doing that because I always like to live with an album. You know, so instead I had to sit there and try and listen while I'm frantically scribbling down notes and everything and trying to remember how stuff went, right? So anyways, the next day I'm going to 5150 in my rental car and everything, you know, and I'm getting the elevator and I've got a stack of materials and they're all Van Halen related. They're probably like some Guitar Player magazines, they're probably some Guitar World stuff, probably God knows what else. But anyways, I get in the elevator and this guy gets in on my floor. He's like, the guy sees my Van Halen stuff. He's like, Van Halen fan, huh? It's like, yeah. It's like, I'm Scotty Ross. You know, I'm their tour manager. I'm the studio manager, whatever. You know, you going up to 5150? No, he tells me he asked me about the thing. I say, oh, I'm here from Guitar Player Magazine. I'm here to interview Ed. He says, oh, I'm Scotty Ross, and I'll see you over at 5150 and everything like that. It's like, wow, that was really cool. You know, sure enough, I pull up to 5150, and I get there, and you know, it's that little jog up, you know, from his house and everything, that little dog leg that goes up there. And I pull up there and Scotty's there. Sammy's there. Jerry Cantrell's there. I don't think Mike was there at that point, but, you know, I see these people and I'm just kind of like milling around like I'm this guy, you know, and everything like that. And I'm just like, okay, what do I do? You know, and Sammy's was funny. He was talking to somebody. I think he was talking to Scotty and he was just kind of complaining about some guy. And he's like, he's some guy with like 3 names, like David Lee Roth, you know, and it's like, Sammy, let it go. You've been in the band for almost a decade now. Let it go. Let it go. And, you know, and Jerry's just kind of looking bewildered as I am, I think, up there, but he's up there and everything. And I'm kind of standing there by the ivy that's hanging down on the wall of 5150 outside the front door. And this guy comes by and he's like, how you doing? You know, and I'm like, I don't recognize this guy. Sunglasses and a goatee, short hair and everything. And it kind of takes like 5 seconds to seep in. That was fucking Ed, you know, but he was so nice. Like everyone else was kind of ignoring me, but Ed acknowledged me like right off the bat and everything.
That's
I mean,
cool.
He probably knew I was the guy from Guitar Player Magazine here to interview him, but he still was just really cool, you know? And then of course we go into the main room there, the where the console is, the mixing booth, you know, basically at 5150, sit down and do our interview and everything. But we chatted, did small talk before and everything. And of course, he played me the record at levels that just, you know, tore a good chunk of my hair off, you know, and everything. And we did our talk, and it was a real nice talk. And we went off on various subjects. He let me play the Music Man, you know, the amber one, the main one, you know, just sitting there and like, here, try it out. What do you think? You know, and everything. And just like, because, you know, once he found out I played, it's like, oh, cool. You know, it's like, holy shit, I have to play guitar in front of Eddie Van Halen. and the photographer was there. We did the photo shoot in the main, you know, tracking room, you know, with his amps and everything, and just shot the shit, you know. And he was just so incredibly down to earth and friendly and nice and everything. And, you know, the gems I was just going through this just here recently where I just left the tape recorder running while the photo shoot was going on. And it's like Rosen stuff where he's just sitting there playing an unplugged guitar. And he's also just chatting about stuff. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's gems in here that I completely forgot about. That's but, cool. You know, and then of course, at one point we were interrupted by Valerie showing up to bitch at him, you know, with little tiny Wolfie there. It's like 3.5 years old and everything like that. And, you know, because he's sitting there amongst a stack of emptied out O'Doul's cans or whatever, Stroh's or not Stroh's, but Sharps or O'Doul's. I think it was Sharps he was drinking actually, but he wasn't drinking at that point. Wasn't drinking alcohol. He was drinking non-alcoholic beer, but it was just like he might as well have been because there was just cans everywhere. And Valerie walks in and sees the cans. She's just like, ugh.
Mm.
Then she starts bitching at Ed about something, and like, Ed's not playing, he's working. Yeah, it looks like we're just sitting around shooting the shit and having fun, but he's doing a photo shoot. You as an actress should get it. But yeah, he was so down to earth, just
Yeah.
incredible. And always, a gentleman, always said hello. Every time I saw him on tour, when I was invited to go hang out backstage and everything, he always made a point to come over and talk with me and stuff. I mean, I'm not going to mention any names, but certain handlers tried to kind of isolate me during those points, and Ed was just like, fuck it, and whatever.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Not surprising. I thought that's, the case,
Yeah. And I don't want to go on and say like he was my best friend or anything like that, because I had a role. I'm a journalist. Brad and I are journalists. That's our job. We talk to Eddie Van Halen as a job. That's our job. And, that's why I think with the book, that I don't care about even Alex's book. It's like, I rather he would have mentioned the book than my name in Brothers,
Right.
because that's really what I care about. I care about Ed. I care about Ed's legacy. I care about presenting him because I'm a biographer. I should be invisible. People should not know my name. They should know my work, and they should know how much it reflects and how accurately portrays the person that I'm covering. And I hope that Brad and I got through in the book, because it was a collective effort, obviously, that we got through how personable and friendly and warm and sometimes tortured and sometimes damaged Eddie Van Halen was.
Yeah.
He was a complex person, and there was an art to his life,
Yeah.
I gotta ask you this question about your book, though. Who wrote the Labrador Retriever line about Ed having the personality that you did it? That's a great line, though, Brad. I mean, it's so funny because it totally does encapsulate the way that he came across to average fans like myself.
Yeah.
He just had that thing, like, and it's something about that friendly thing that you're talking about, Chris, that he just wore it. Like, it was just
that smile was not a put on.
Right.
That smile was so fucking genuine. It was not a pose. It was not an image. It was him. That smile was genuine. I believe me, I've talked to plenty of bands. Oh God, White Zombie. When I started shooting photography, because that's another issue. I got into that because I knew I had better rights as a photographer than I did as a writer. So I started shooting photography when I did stuff, and I did More Human Than Human when I did that video. And I remember I'd shot a bunch of just behind the scenes of them, making the video. I was with White Zombie all day while they were doing it, and I sent my photos over to the band members, for their approval for the magazine. And they're like, "Oh, I'm smiling in that shot. That's a White Zombie no." It's like, 'cause they had to be tough and they had to be hard, and whatever. And it's like, I had a shot of Sean Yseult getting, makeup applied. Can't have that. It's like,
Yeah, well, that's what they talk about Van Halen in general. Where like they were the first hard rock band not afraid to smile, to be happy, which is interesting in Al talking about how I think it was Templeman that came up with the idea of incorporating, Mike and Ed's harmonies in there to give it that more uplifting little sunshine happiness to sound, because really they're more of a hard and heavy, darker band in Al's mind is what they wanted to be, Ed and Al, because the bands they listened to were like Sabbath.
The fascinating thing in any great band, and sometimes it's hard for bands to see it themselves, but it's like actually Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin were pretty good about this. They would always say that Led Zeppelin was the differences between all of them. It was like each one brought a little something different to the table. And that was the one thing that is the most difficult thing to wrestle with the Van Halen legacy, is the fact that the guys within the band didn't seem to appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah.
Templeman definitely brought something to the table. He understood, the idea of making commercial records. Yet he still understood that the great thing about Van Halen was their immediacy, and he was able to bring both of those sides together, and also, again, when we talk about how Mike Anthony has been ignored unjustly, I believe, is, one gets the feeling that they didn't completely appreciate what he brought to the table. And
I got to interject because I just thought of something. I don't want to lose it.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
And it ties in with Mike Anthony in so many ways. Like Mike was the sauce, and like you look at a good meal, like a French meal or whatever, and it's like it may be this exquisite piece of meat, or fish or something like that, and these vegetables and all these other things. But what really completes the dish is the sauce. And that's Mike.
Yeah.
And without it,
he was a great bass player, and Ed very rarely would acknowledge that. And his harmonies did bring a sort of a commercial aspect to the band that they wouldn't have had without him.
a fully identifiable sound.
Mm-hmm. And even, in a band that in many ways, in a bizarre way, the original band did parallel the Beatles, whereas sort of every guy brought a different thing to the plate, and even a personality, his personality. We love Van Halen partly because we can relate to different guys in the band, and Mike was so relatable.
It's important to know it's Ed and Mike together what that created, that sound.
Yeah, but even persona wise, and what have you, you just got this feeling of incredible likability. It seems like Alex in the book, sort of has come around certainly to what Dave's contributions were and how,
sure.
And certainly, Ed's contributions and his own contributions,
And he's actually very positive about Gene Simmons, which was
right.
And Gene, I mean, it's everybody likes to talk about what an asshole Gene Simmons was.
Yeah.
but certainly with Van Halen, you couldn't have found somebody more fair and more helpful to those. So it was good that he acknowledged that.
He got a kick out of Gene's sense of humor.
Yeah,
hanging out with Gene, and so
yeah. So do you guys think? Do you think that there's going to be a sequel?
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
he already said something like he needed to see how it went, but then he was gonna, obviously now that he has the buzz going and he sees what's happening. I mean, I would think.
So the question is, did he intentionally leave Sammy out for that reason, or did he intentionally leave Sammy era out just to
ask Brad
to Sammy?
Ask Brad.
I will tell you what my thoughts are, because this book was as telling as. It's like what they say about jazz. It's the notes you don't play as much as it's the notes you play. Yeah. Well, in this book, it's like what's not mentioned actually probably weighs heavier than what actually is mentioned. And you look in the back of the book and you look at the names and the thank yous and stuff. And if you know stuff about Van Halen, you can see a few glaring omissions back there. And I think the silence of the book kind of speaks to a certain thing. And maybe Al will have a bit of an awakening and coming around. I think initially that this was his plan, that was not to acknowledge that, but at the same time, it's like, they have put out the Sammy era stuff here. They have remastered it.
I would say this too, is for as much as everybody's talked about, the book is about Alex's relationship with Ed, and that certainly, the commercial driver. The figure actually that looms the largest in the whole book is their dad. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the theme that keeps coming around over.
Oh, yeah.
Is we're a product of this guy. And
Right.
this guy was, he not only influenced us in great ways, as in terms of musicianship and sort of the lessons that we learned from him, but influences in not so good ways, and in
Yeah.
their combativeness and their relationship to drugs and alcohol. But Alex always in almost every chapter brings it back around to his dad.
Yes.
Let me
Amazing.
ask you guys about his dad. There's this part where he almost blames himself and Eddie for putting his dad, basically they retired him, and when he retired him, he said he kind of started to slip, and
Yeah.
he kind of lost his way, and his father kind of declined. I thought
Yeah.
that was a glaring thing that I'd never knew about, and
Right.
and the
Well,
whole
it's almost like their success, kept him from working anymore, and then he kind of lost his sense of purpose. And we see that happen with many people. They say like it happens with airline pilots. My dad was an airline pilot, and it kind of happened with him. Is that he lost that part of his life, and then it's like, what do I do with my time?
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I keep writing. That's why I keep on doing what I do too. Some people will say that it's like, hey, if they talk about like, are you going to write more? Are you going to continue to do that? And I'm like, yeah, what the hell else am I going to do?
It's so true. Talk about
I mean,
retiring. It's like retiring to what?
yeah.
You know?
I know Jeff's going to be out there, rocking his audiences to hell until
Hey, by the way, yeah, Jeff.
away.
Jeff's no slouch on the guitar, man.
Well,
Let me
right.
tell you, I see clips of his band.
Yeah, no, it's nuts.
I do want to bring it back though to the guys, because it's like, let's look at this.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, Ed and Al, musicians for life, and I
Yeah.
think Al is torn because
But who's the real musician for life? It's Mike Anthony.
well,
Yeah.
yes, because he's still out there playing, but but Ed and Al did
Yeah.
play together constantly and everything like that. And Al has lost that part of his life. That's a big hole in his life because they only made music together. I mean, Ed did go out and do other little extracurricular things. Al less so. Al was just like,
Sure.
and that's why I think he mentions Beat It and why it just rips him apart so bad when it's like, gosh, can you just take a more pessimistic view of something that was like one of the most important, events of, the century of the 20th
40 years
century.
later, he's still, the NPR host said, look, let me show you the other side of this. I'm an African-American woman. I just was introduced to your brother because of Michael Jackson's Beat It. And he's like, yeah, I see what you're saying, but still, I can't change my mind.
Yes.
He's like, I'm still pissed off.
I do want to go off on this subject, because it's important, because he talks about this resentment over 1984 not reaching number 2, and it's because if Ed hadn't played on that damn record, it's like bullshit. You guys were up against you were fighting City Hall. You were up against this juggernaut of a record that came out in late 82, was on and off the number 1 position throughout 1983. And let me tell you this, the entirety of the first, quarter of 1984, Michael Jackson's Thriller album sat in the number 1 position from January 1st all the way through mid-April. And when, back then charts was a slow climb. It wasn't like you debuted at number 1. That was a very rare occurrence that ever happened. And Van Halen's 1984 climbed up and it reached the number 2 point at March 17th. But you were up against Thriller, and Thriller had sat at number 1 all that time, and nothing knocked it off. And what finally knocked it off? The Footloose soundtrack.
Right.
Just talk about a lowest common denominator pop album that's out there being bought by all the Dayglow Reagan youth, and the Just Say No kids and everything like that. I remember that period. I remember going to see a Police concert. My roommate and I smoked a joint, and kids turned around and looked at us like we were just Charles Manson, and it's like,
I mean, Thriller was so much more than a record,
It was a cultural touchdown. And Eddie Van Halen,
and you know how much that had to have driven David Lee Roth insane.
But Eddie was a participant.
He was doing the break dance on stage, Dave.
And
you know, see how he did the moonwalk. I mean, he did the moonwalk.
But I will say that, Eddie playing on that record probably, it probably brought more Michael Jackson fans, like the woman doing the NPR interview, over to the Van Halen side than the opposite. Eddie Van Halen probably didn't bring all that many rockers over to buying Michael Jackson albums, but
that's what's going to happen to us, Chris, is that Al's book is going to bring so many new people over to our.
That's right.
That's what we're hoping. Actually, our book is Beat It, basically, and it's like come on, the water's fine. It's nice over here. It's it's really relaxing. But Ed did this thing, and it didn't hurt Van Halen one iota. If anything, it helped. It helped drive that album to selling 10 million copies. Yes, you didn't get number 2, but you know what? The Billboard chart is bullshit. Especially back then, it was bullshit because it was unscientific. It was just like they would call around to a bunch of major retailers and ask them, "Hey, what's selling this week?" Thriller's still doing really good. We're still selling a lot of copies of that. Well, what else you got selling? 1984, Loverboy, whatever. Very unscientific, and it's a fucking number. And you sold a shitload of records. You did the most phenomenal tour to back that thing up.
So true. It's like Brad and I were talking about his Detroit Lions when he was on for Eruption 5. It's kind of like it's not the same as a team losing the Super Bowl and everybody forgets about that team. We all know in 1984. So it was number 2. Nobody gives a shit. And you know what? It really doesn't matter, but it speaks to also the overall theme of the book, Unfinished, the song title Unfinished. Like Alex he regrets like what could have been with that era, which
I think that's
unfinished.
The thing that maybe sticks in his craw about it is, obviously Alex, as he says in his book, that was the height of Van Halen, right? He thinks that was their moment and wishes it could have gone on. And somehow he sees that Beat It as something that
blocked there. Yeah. That blocked.
Or it started the whole downfall.
It started the whole downfall because that after
there's that too. But you know what? That was inevitable. Dave had one foot out the door already, probably the day that he joined Van Halen. He had.
I don't take that view. I think Dave is just oblivious. I mean, I think he's the ultimate narcissist, and that he probably did think just like Ed's foray into Michael Jackson, that his movie would make the band bigger and him more popular, and that's why he offered them to do the soundtrack. I mean, I actually believe that David Lee Roth in his heart of snowblind hearts, actually genuinely thought that they were going to receive this with open arms and think, yes, this is great.
I'm with you on that.
Film star, and we're going to do this soundtrack, and it's going to take Van Halen in a whole nother direction and make us bigger. And
because those 4 songs on Crazy from the Heat, I feel were intentionally so far removed from Van Halen for a reason, so that way nobody got confused and thought he was going to be moving on.
I don't think he wanted the end of that band. I can't believe it, but
no, I don't. I will say that I don't think so either. But I think they talk about this stuff and it breaking up the band, and it's like Ed was just had unbridled creativity, in 1982, and I hope we kind of discussed that pretty well in Eruption. But I know when I did the 1984 album interview with him, that's the way I set it up. Is like, you were doing all this stuff. You and Don went over to Frank Zappa to produce this single with Dweezil, which also, Alex kind of
it was Ed's stubbornness that had more to do with the breakup of the band than
well,
Dave Roth's
yeah, it was
wantonness.
egos. It was battling egos and everything like that. But
Yeah.
there was
Well,
plenty
Al
of
said they were arguing over everything, big
Yeah.
and small.
there was plenty of room for Ed to go off and sow his wild oats and express himself, and to do stuff like Dave did that didn't really fit into the Van Halen oeuvre.
Right, right.
That he should have been allowed to do this stuff to keep
Well,
the juices flowing.
Right.
Not unlike the Beatles, it's the real tragedy is about, and I never really thought about it this way. I mean, a couple of years ago, I did a Beatles special where I had, newsstand special where I had to sort of condense their history. And what was really interesting was, so you had McCartney, I'll make this quick. You had McCartney, who was essentially sort of a genuine workaholic. And you had the other guys in the band who just didn't want to work quite that hard. And then when you realize, so they did the White Album, and it was a double album, and they had to write all these songs. And the next record, McCartney was literally 2 or 3 weeks later saying, okay, guys, what do we do for the next record? And Lennon, who was inherently a little lazy anyhow, was like, dude, just give us all a little break here. We need a break, But McCartney was like, we have to push this band. We had, if McCartney, after the White Album, if McCartney would have just laid back a little bit and just let the other guys go off and express themselves a little bit, the Beatles would have went on forever. And
I'm going to get off the Beatles here and bring it back to Van Halen. Sorry to interrupt you because we're getting along here and everything.
Yeah.
But what really was a bigger sticking point than Beat It was Valerie Bertinelli.
Yeah.
Let's be honest here. Television star, America's sweetheart, and everything, and that's really where things started to unravel.
Oh, right, with Dave, yeah, he was pissed
with
off.
Dave, that's where, because he thought he should be this. Ed didn't want the fame and all the spotlight and everything like that, but he was getting it.
Yeah, you guys remember that Ed said that he was okay with the Roth thing, that he didn't care. I mean, he thought it was no big deal at one point.
And initially he did, and in the moment at that particular time, it wasn't until a little bit later that this stuff kind of came to blows and everything.
Right.
And it's just, really, what did break it up? We don't really know because we weren't there, and I don't even know if they were there because they were, kind of out of their minds.
We have a pretty good idea. We have a pretty good idea what broke it up. And it was a battle of egos. But I think if they would have just taken a year off and let Dave do his thing.
Right.
I think they were trying to, right? The record, the whole Diver Down thing, the Us Festival, it just, like you said with McCartney, it just pushed and pushed and pushed.
Just pushed and pushed and pushed.
Yeah, you can rewind back a little bit more because Alex talks about the photo sessions for Women and Children First. They have Al and Ed go to the hardware store to get some chains or whatever.
Right.
It's like, oh no, this is our opportunity to get Dave on the cover. And that's when things started. Like Alex said, the fame started to get to him. So that started. And then Valerie.
A hell of a drug too, I got to tell you.
Yeah.
And Ed kind of felt that, I think he kind of downplays the Michael Jackson thing, but come on, he wasn't just some little skinny black kid.
Right. Oh, I know.
Off the Wall was a huge record. It wasn't Thriller level, but it still was a big record.
Sure. He wanted to work with,
Quincy.
He wanted to work with Quincy Jones, and
who he hung up on when he first called. Who the hell is this? It's Quincy Jones. Fuck you.
And he was buds with Luke. He was buds with Luke too, and everything. And my gosh, it was the early '80s, and there was the whole fascination with the whole LA studio crowd and everything too. And I think Ed kind of wanted to be a little bit of a part of that. He didn't want to leave Van Halen, but I think he kind of. Those guys were the players. That was the talk around town in LA at the time. Was the studio dudes? They were the shit.
That was an interesting thing in the book where Alex does actually touch a bit on that of Ed's hypocrisy, which I found to be interesting. The issues that he had with, Ed sort of going off and doing all these little different side projects, and almost
Nicolette Larson,
in sort of almost defends David's.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. I don't even want to get into because I can spend another hours with you guys fact checking stuff. But the Nicolette Larson thing that you brought up was not at the time frame that he said it was. That was when they did the first album. And I
Okay.
remember that because I remember seeing that. The word got out. We knew it was Eddie Van Halen. I was actually going to buy that Nicolette Larson album, even though that's the last thing I wanted as a 15, 16-year-old kid. But that was the same time as the first album.
Okay.
And I remember the album cover with lead guitar question mark. And everything.
Interesting.
So that wasn't a later thing. That was something that, Ted just asked Ed for a quickie favor.
That was a Ted Templeman thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she was on Warner Brothers. He produced her album.
Yeah. And it was just like, hey, Ed, why don't you pop in, come by and do this? And it was really like,
It would have been cool to have Eddie on a Doobie Brothers album. That would have been
yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And you know what? Have you actually heard the solo? Have you heard it? It's really kind of a letdown.
No, on Nicolette Larson's track?
Yeah, the Nicolette Larson thing.
No, I'd
it's like his tone's like pretty clean and everything, and it's kind of like you hear it and you kind of go like, yeah.
Yeah, I can't even tell it's him and Al on those Kiss tracks.
Yeah, yeah.
Put on
we can go on and on about this stuff because there was the whole thing that the brothers with Kiss and everything like that. There was Ed, the rumored thing about Ed wanting to join Kiss, which I kind of doubt, but there was stuff going on all over the place in the 80s and the early 80s and, even the late 70s and everything. I mean, really the times where I think Van Halen was pure and was a band of brothers. And, it was really the first two records,
which is indicated by Al in the book. I think he alludes to that.
I think also, like, if we want to get into just a little bit of speculation, when we're talking a little bit before about the pressure on Ed, the fact that they just kept on pushing him for product as fast as possible. That's probably, like, if that hadn't been the case, I don't think he would have held it so much against Mike Anthony. But I think he was feeling so much of the pressure, so much of the creative pressure that he wanted to share it with some, that wished somebody else would sort of step up. Probably if it hadn't been, the thing hadn't been so fast paced, he would have probably been a little more forgiving. Maybe not. I don't know.
I just for the record too, I'd like to defend Michael Anthony on the four-way publishing thing too, because I really didn't add this, but it's not like Michael was putting a gun to anybody's head saying, "Give me 1/4." I can't imagine him doing that. So just I mean, he was probably like, "Whatever you guys." In the beginning, it was all for one for all. We split it.
I mean, I would have taken it,
right? So it's not like. I can't imagine Michael Anthony saying, "You're giving me 1/4."
Yeah, no, shit. Not at all. And the thing was, it was smart for them to split things 4 ways in the beginning because I have seen that happen to other bands where we may not have even gotten to Women and Children first if there wasn't that. I mean, I'm sorry, but here we had more recently where things were a 4-way split with A Different Kind of Truth in the Tokyo album, and unfortunately, 1/4 of that left this mortal coil. And his son was collecting that 4th. And we had that record taken off the market. It was taken off of Spotify and streaming services. It was no longer available to buy in physical format anymore.
It was 50% Wolf, 25 Dave, 25 Al.
Yeah, because somebody was getting a larger cut than the other guys.
I mean, and to be honest, look, if they hadn't given Mike a 1/4, it would have been a little hard for them to justify giving Al a 1/4 too.
Right.
Yeah.
So in some ways, Mike gave Al a little bit of coverage, even though Ed often said that Al sort of helped produce the songs in the sense that he helped him, arrange the sections the way they are, so on and so forth. But
I think Cheap Trick is one of the few bands out there that has managed to do that, where Rick Nielsen gets the lion's share of the song publishing. I mean, look at the Police. Sting wrote most of the stuff and was credited as such and made more money than the other guys, and look how long they lasted.
Let me ask you guys this about Mike. You guys, since you knew Eddie so well, and Mike, I mean, it seemed like just I've met Mike a few times, and they seem like they would be great buddies.
Mm-hmm.
Like their personalities seem like they would mesh. Like like you were saying, Roth and Al have a similar kind of brain. It seemed like Mike and Ed sort of had that same kind of.
To be honest with you,
Go ahead.
Incredibly different people.
You really think so?
Yeah. Because again, Ed's public persona, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying it's false, it's definitely a part of him,
Mm-hmm.
was of sort of like a chill, like happy-go-lucky, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But behind the scenes, he was obsessive compulsive,
Okay.
And
about a lot of
intense.
stuff, like which you can see, because of how much detail that he put into creating his guitars, his amps, how much thought, like how much attention that he put on tone, how much blah, 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 blah. Ed had a super OCD part of his personality.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike was just never that way. I mean, Mike saw his role, which I think correctly, as maybe as Chris put it, as sort of sauce, like he an important component,
Right.
but knew that he wasn't David Lee Roth. He knew he wasn't Ed. He knew he wasn't Al. He was, sort of just, and you need guys like this. Just he was a
Absolutely.
worker bee and contributed in his own kind of way.
Right.
He was the dude's rug. He brought the room together.
And yeah, and he would be like, he was the guy with the bar,
Right.
at the show. He was more the bartender than he was, the owner of the bar, so to speak.
Right.
So and I think he was quite content with that role and happy to do it to the best of his abilities. I mean, Ed talked about how he didn't have to work that hard, So it was like Mike came in, played his bass lines, and there you go. Here's my vocals. Did everything in one or two takes. Like what else?
Well, it's sort of the same thing with Sammy. Like when Sammy was coming in to do his vocals, and Ed sort of seemed to resent the fact that he had to carry so much weight. Like we've mentioned, you talked about the pressure of it.
And Mike didn't want that way. I mean, he didn't, I don't know if that's not quite the right way to put it. It's just, he knew that he wasn't Ed and he knew he wasn't Dave. He wasn't going to be writing the songs, but he was going to do his best to make those things shine in their best kind of light. And that's valuable in a band.
Look at
Jeff, in your band, not everybody's going to have to, and if everybody was yelling at the same time, it wouldn't work either. Sure. So, off camera or off interview, I think they were actually quite
different
and, not opposites like Ed and Dave, but I think that I think Mike is exactly how he appeared, like much more easygoing.
Right. He is a good guy. I love that guy.
Yeah.
So in the early days, there was some talk about Mom, which we haven't talked about, and how she was a taskmaster. And then Al she says, he always plays that high crying sound, right? And then he says, it's hard to see your kids suffer. Like he's crying emotionally from, I don't know if it's Mom, or it just seems like Mom was such a demanding person. I don't know if that's.
I think it was a combination of stuff. I think, everybody's built a little different. I don't know if you guys got kids. I got kids, and even though they came from the same mother and father, they're such different personalities, And I think all of those things that Al talks about and we talk about in the beginning of our books affected him, and he was more sensitive, being bullied at school.
It's funny with that quote though, because I know that quote very well because Ed told that to me,
Okay.
and it talk about something being taken completely out of context because, it's an interesting viewpoint, and I'm glad that he put it in there because it paints things in a different light. But it's just I'm sorry, it was just loud electric guitar that annoyed his mom, and it's just high frequencies. My mom used to say, like, can you play your guitar, loud to get the mice out of the attic?
So, I don't think that she's wrong. I mean, I do think like Ed's sound, as any great musician is an extension, and what she heard in it was his pain, like almost like a blues player to some degree, and I do think that was a reflection of
Yeah,
Ed.
but come on, Ed, I'm sorry I have to disagree with you because I don't know what Ed's childhood was like, but he sure as hell wasn't playing the blues. And that's in my Balance interview that he says, like, I don't play the blues. I'm a happy guy.
No, not tonality wise, but just in
No, but
terms.
even just the notes and whatever it is talking about, he was Ed's crying or whatever. He wasn't crying through his instrument at that point in his life. It was the sheer joy,
Mm.
of playing. He was getting into it. That's why he spent so many hours doing it. He was less than that point where you get to, where you are playing the blues, where you're expressing your woes and your frustrations with the world. At that point, it was the sheer joy and the discovery and the exploration of the instrument and everything. And it was interesting that he recast it in this way that my brother was in the room playing guitar and he was crying through his instrument when he really wasn't. He was. All of us who play guitar, you know how it is when you're starting off.
Right.
You don't you aren't playing the blues. I'm sorry. Even if you're Joe Bonamassa at 12 years old and you can play the notes, you ain't playing the blues though.
Yeah.
Well, that's the funny thing about Ed's sound, though. When I think of the high crying sound or whatever she's saying there, that is the thing that attracted me to Ed was how when he was in the upper register, it had actually a kind of a more pleasing tone than most people in the upper register.
Yeah, and what also came later that came as part of his tonal experiments and everything like
Right,
that. Because
right, right,
obviously you hear the earlier recordings and it's a different thing.
right.
But yeah, that was an interesting thing though for him to it put a spin on it. It was interesting to hear him, and it was interesting to know that. I mean, I think having been a shy introvert myself, I think it's really sometimes it's just not pain. It's just like you don't want to deal with other people and their bullshit, so you become absorbed in your own world, and guitar is your escape. It was for me.
Yeah,
But that's what she was hearing, and I sort of buy into it. Like you look at the Van Halen childhood, and it's a weird and Al does paint a picture. I mean, look, they had mother, father that the father was drinking, and they had to get him out of jail a couple of times. And the mother and father were fighting, like, the mother would be hitting, like, his dad over the head with the pots and pans.
right, right,
Well,
right.
I have to interject and disagree because I think, she was just flipping annoyed because he wasn't playing classical piano anymore. He was playing rock and roll and he was being seduced by the dark side.
Okay.
That's what I think it was. I don't think she was hearing her son suffering or anything like that. She was hearing like, oh, that infernal noise,
Yeah.
Right, right.
get over here.
It
Stop
was
Wear a suit.
noise.
You have to wear a suit.
such an
gotta
interesting
wear a suit.
dynamic of the mom and dad, though. That was one of the
Mhm.
things that he described Pasadena too, as not being the place it is now. It's really well kept, and where he lived at that point on Los Lunas or whatever was a different kind of neighborhood back in that day.
It was the other side of the tracks because I know I didn't live there then, but I lived in Pasadena during the 80s.
Yeah.
And that point there above the freeway that cuts through, which I can't remember the name of it now because I've been too many years removed from there that I used to be able to. No one calls freeways in LA by their numbers; they call them all by whatever some name. But
Right.
whatever that freeway is, when you're up there, and you think it'd be the nice part because you're to the higher ground, you're getting up into the foothills and everything like that.
Yeah.
But that was the bad side of the tracks, and that's where they lived.
Hey, I would love to know, a quick aside, Back to the Future and Halloween are filmed in Pasadena. How close are they to Ed and Al's house?
Which part? Which
Where
one?
they filmed?
Well, the Gamble House is only about 5 miles.
Because Halloween,
Doc Brown's house is right there.
okay. Halloween was filmed in Pasadena too.
There's a lot of stuff filmed there.
I don't know the exact location. I'll have to look it up. I
'Cause
can probably tell you, but
It does look similar to the area that Eddie lived
I can tell you I had the wrong impression about David Lee Roth's house because I always thought that he lived in San Marino just by judging by the style of the architecture and everything. And I actually know the neighborhood where his house is. It's a nice neighborhood, but the Roth house is by far it eclipses other houses in the neighborhood,
Really?
and everything like that. But that's the good side of town. The further south you get, you get to South Pasadena, and stuff, which is another nice area, and you've got a lot of nice craftsman homes and stuff like that. But I know that the other side there, that was more rough and tumble thing. It's like, I mean, they have these places. I don't know if they're probably all long gone now, but you can always tell when you're starting to get into a little bit of a rough neighborhood when you start to see the place where, it's like the seafood restaurant and they've got the sign like, you buy, we fry.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I'm entering the rough part of town. I'm entering the mean streets,
A lot of guys in Pasadena would tell me about, Poobah Records, where he got his records,
Yeah.
Well, there was 3 locations, and the first location was like below a porn theater or something in this rougher area in downtown Pasadena, which is now not like that at all. But yeah, they would talk about how that had moved around. And
I love the videos, Jeff, you did with going to the Hot for Teacher locations.
I remember downtown Pasadena was Bumtown. I remember the pawn shops and everything like that, and the empty lofts and everything like that, and the really awesome, hole in the wall Mexican restaurants and stuff like that, which has been replaced by, the Gap and whatever, I can't, I'm just losing my train of thought, but all these, yuppie type of furniture stores and things like that. Those were not around back then. I remember having a band and there was a pawn shop and there was a Ampeg little stud bass with a Mexican flag on it that I tried to convince my bass player to buy, because it was so wacky, but yeah, it was rough.
Hey man, I think an essential ingredient to any good rock and roll is a little bit of white trash, to be honest.
Oh, you got to have the grit. You got to have
a little, that angst and that frustration of where you come from.
And Roth got it, even though Roth was from a well-to-do family and everything like that, but he hung out with the kids. He had
the work ethic.
That had the better musical taste. Yeah.
I just get the feeling that at the end of the day, their parents had nothing but the best intentions, and they raised their kids the way they felt that, maybe they were raised, and like the father was just like, hey, if you fall and scratch your knee, here's a drink.
Well, again, I'll bring it back
take
to
a drink.
Again.
It's that type of thing. I mean, Alex punched his dad, again, unfinished business. Like, he regrets that. Like, boy, I wish I never did that. And he never really talked about it. It was just like,
no,
we didn't talk for 2 years. We just sat in the same room and drank together. It was like alcohol was like the
thing. It was the sign of the times. I talked with Ed about this, and I wish there could have been, again, I can't wish upon what the book should have been. It is what it is, but talking with Ed about, it was the times, corporal punishment was common during the 60s. You spanked your kids. That was the way you disciplined them. I sure as hell got the tar whipped out of me, numerous times by my military dad, and
my dad had a thing over our staircase that was called the Board of Education.
Yeah. Well, but the thing was that getting back to Ed,
and if we'd gotten out of line, he actually made us go get a ladder, climb up the ladder, and get the Board of Education and hand it to him. Like it was a whole torture.
I got to tell you, my dad was just a teddy bear, and that's where I get it from. They always say, like, I'm a supervisor at my full-time job. I'm like, you're too nice. But my dad used to say, I'd let your mom do all the punching.
Bring it back to Ed, though. I want to bring back to Ed. I just want to concentrate on that because, he went through that. He experienced that. He got the wooden spoon, and everything, the wrap on the fingers and everything, and the punishment, but he didn't do that to his kid.
Interesting, right? Yeah.
He was very proud of the fact he told me I never spanked Wolfgang once, and he was very proud of the fact that Wolfgang did not pick up the habit for drinking, and all this other stuff.
Right. Isn't that amazing too?
Yeah. He was very careful to make that transition, and to not have his kid experience that.
Yeah. Sometimes we learn to do things that our parents did, and we learn what not to do.
Yeah.
Based off of what our parents did.
Yeah. And it's, that's, a point that I think they learned from that. I mean, I'm kind of just free associating here too, but I don't think Ed gets enough credit for so much stuff. I mean, look at all the lives that he brought up. I wish that was something that Ed Alex would have acknowledged anything, because look, he made all of you rich. You guys lived the American dream. You bought your parents' homes. You had all this stuff. Where's the celebration of the success that you had? Generations of Von Halens, Van Halen's, are going to be set for life because of your brother and his one-of-a-kind talent. And so many other people have benefited off of that. Sammy Hagar and his children, David Lee Roth and, whoever
How many of your children he
he
has?
adopts.
He's a
it
family
goes-
man. He started many families, as he said.
Yes, it goes on and on of all these people whose lives he touched and enriched,
Right.
and yes, it's a struggle to be the greatest guitarist in the world. But you know what? Let's celebrate the fact that this guy, Brad and I probably would not have had regular jobs if it hadn't been for Eddie Van Halen. Probably 90% of the guitar industry would not be able to do something that they love to make a living. We would not be here today talking like this if it wasn't for him. And I think the impact that he had was very wide reaching. And gosh, can we celebrate that?
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that, man.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how the greatest sound in the world is the sound of Eddie playing the guitar. There's nothing like it. And I love tons of bands, but I have never had, I knew I was a serious fan in the late 90s, early 2000s when a lot of the fair weather fans started to fall aside, no interest anymore, indifferent, whatever. I just became a bigger fan.
What other guitar players do you know?
Second would be, well, it's interesting because this is going to maybe surprising, Jerry Garcia.
Oh,
I just love all kinds of music. I love Springsteen, The Dead, The Cure. So, which is interesting with Van Halen because there's a darker aspect to Van Halen, which I love the gothic. I love the classic horror films. I love The Cure. And there's a dark side to Van Halen that it's there that I connect with. And that's fair warning.
On this tour, in this past tour.
Love The Cure. And the new album dropped yesterday.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Love it.
Those guys play.
Yeah.
Like
but yeah.
3 hours. It was like insane.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But I have never had any music lift me up like that. I've never through some pretty dark times, and great times, in college, just partying with friends. And I'd have to start with Eddie. I'd have to start with Van Halen and just blast that music.
Who's number two for you, Jeff?
What was
Is there any other guitar player in the universe for you?
Well,
Jeff?
I mean, I interviewed one. I interviewed number two. Interviewed
George Lynch.
George Lynch.
Yeah, great interview.
My number two. And, I had all the same. Gary Moore was a big one for me. I love Gary. And Michael Schenker was an early, when I think I first heard instrumental music, it was Schenker and Captain Nemo, and that stuff that he did. And I was just awestruck by him. But Eddie, this brings me back to something I wanted to talk about. Was one of the things in the book is that moment you guys alluded to earlier where they're watching TV with their dad and Liberace's on TV, right? Yeah. But they're watching the show that I discovered Van Halen on, which is In Concert, Don Kirshner. Yeah. So I didn't even know they watched that show. And then it turns out they were watching that show with their dad.
Yep.
And then end up being their videos that become so iconic,
And I love that. Yeah, the Beatles influenced them, but they always say the Dave Clark Five more than the Beatles, which you talk to most classic rock artists and they say it's watching the Beatles, but the Dave Clark Five they loved.
Those Dave Clark Five records. The grooves were totally stomping on. Some pieces. I mean, it's really a rager.
And some love to Alvin Lee in the book. I mentioned I was at a football game with my brothers and cousins last night, just telling that story about Eddie learning note for note the solo on 10 years after. That was
one of those tests, like Crossroads.
Yeah.
Like when we were kids, when
Crossroads.
Crossroads and
or Steve Vai's Crossroads, which is another test from my generation.
Going home, those were the early. Can you play? Well, if you could play that, then you could really play.
Yeah.
Brad, you got to go eat or something? Your wife keeps coming in there. Are you good?
I'm good.
Okay, I don't want to keep you if you got to go.
No, I'm fine.
So what else did you think, Brad? I mean, there were anything in that first part of the book that stuck out to you as something that you guys didn't cover in your book? That was
Well, again, it was a bit of a distraction for me to come across some of our stuff in there. But my takeaway from this book was that um, Alex just had to get something off of his chest, and that was how he felt about his brother and how he felt about his dad. So to me, you have to take it that way. That's how you have to take it. It was never going to be this great, here's how I set up my drums in the studio kind of microcosm. It was just this thing. And I think it also had to do with Alex's own feelings of mortality. I mean, as we found out from the Rolling Stone interview, he had been flat on his back for a year.
Mhm.
He probably during that period had an enormous amount of time to introspection and to think about, well, what does it all mean? And also when you're that vulnerable, I even know when I get a cold now, I'm sort of like, I'm gonna die. You
Yeah.
start thinking about those things. So I think like you guys, because we're music guys, we're music nerds, like, would I have loved to have had a chapter on each one of their records, which I'm sure he was capable of writing about? Yes, I would have loved more detail. But I do feel that um, if you look at it from an emotional point of view, that the book was a success. I mean,
Yeah.
I did walk away with a strong feeling about how he felt about his dad, how he felt about his brother, and about Dave. Although I still feel like he's probably still struggling with that a bit. Um, I walked away feeling that he probably really, really, really liked Dave a lot and that they were real running buddies. And there would probably be some stories that would curl your toes with Alex and Dave that
Yeah.
I wouldn't have mind hearing a couple of those if it was at all possible.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, I feel like if you want to know the nerd stuff, if you want to know like the a lot about the more about the music and how they felt about recording each one of those records, then you should definitely go out and buy Eruption. But if you want to know about the emotional component of the band, then Brothers is a really nice look into that. And I will be surprised actually if he does another book. I don't think it was I don't believe it was a calculated cash grab on his part. I think it was Alex coming to terms with his own feelings and his
Yeah.
emotions
I
and
will I
wanting to
will
get it
add
out
to
there.
that I think, he needed to do a tribute in some way, shape, or form
Yes.
to his brother. And I wish, which we did get out of the Rolling Stone interview, that we got what happened. I have insider information about what happened behind the scenes from another perspective of the botched attempt to do a tribute. There were efforts to do that, and it just wasn't going to happen. I think Alex really wanted to, and part of the reason why Brad and I did our book is because it needed to be done.
Mm.
Somebody needed to do it, and there's other things that went on that go even beyond that of why our book came out when it did. But Ed needed a tribute. My gosh, such a figure of so legendary and of such stature to just, I mean, yes, we were in the midst of COVID and everything, and we had this other stuff going on, but still something needed to be done. And I don't want to point fingers like when the Grammy had the thing and it was kind of just, it was underwhelming, you know, but it could have been better, but the whole Roth thing was just, and I think Alex needed to do this book just to pay tribute to his brother. He just needed to do that. And
I
so,
don't think he's interested in paying tribute to Sammy Hagar.
yeah, he isn't.
Yeah.
He isn't really. And I think that is interesting because I know, how Ed felt about Sammy. I know how he felt about Dave, and I was surprised, especially what after Dave did to put the kibosh on the tribute, that Alex was actually as complimentary about the guy as he was, because basically Dave prevented that happening in a musical sense.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the fact that Dave wasn't going to acknowledge Ed. That was a big, huge reason. That was the primary reason, but also was that it had to be the Dave show. Dave didn't want guests up there. He didn't want there to be like the Taylor Hawkins type of tribute. He didn't want this cavalcade of stars, or even the Freddie Mercury tribute that Alex talked about. Dave didn't want that. He wanted like, I'm David Lee Roth. To him, it's another Van Halen concert.
It's really disappointing.
And
as a huge Dave fan, it's just disappointing.
It's disappointing to everybody.
Love Dave, but man, dude,
it's a weird thing that. But I think Alex had to do this, and so will there be a part two? Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think Alex feels an obligation.
I think that this book was about him expressing his love for his brother and his dad
in the way that he knew how to do it. And I think he's not a writer, and I think he was probably convinced by the ghostwriter and by HarperCollins to rehash the well-told Van Halen story all over again, which, us big fans can recite to you, like a priest can recite passages from the Bible. But they wanted to reach the more general fans, so they felt like there was a need to go through this history stuff, and a ghostwriter dug up what she could find. I'm going to be critical of her because in the choice of her behind it, because she's a very good writer, and that's a great thing to do sometimes. But I think in this case, they needed another person there who was a fan and could correct all the glaring factual errors. And there are many. And like I said, we can spend another hour and a half of me going through bit by bit of what I've found in there. And it does a disservice to us Van Halen historians because this is becoming canon, and people are going to go to Alex's book and recite this stuff, and the facts are going to grow. Again, I call myself Sisyphus. I've pushed the rock. I got the rock to the top of the hill when we finished Eruption, and now that rock has rolled back down again. And here I am trying to push it back up again. But it just would have been nice to have somebody who knew and could say, like, yes, we can cover the history, but this has been well rehashed and everything. And it's not Alex's fault, really. Alex could remember wide swaths of what happened. But it would have been nice to have him direct him more towards what we really don't know, and you can still tell the Van Halen story, but in a way that we haven't heard. Noel Monks did it. Book did it. David Lee Roth's book did it. Even the Ted Templeman book did it. Van Halen Rising certainly did it in a different way. Why
do you think they chose Ariel Levy for this project?
Because she writes for the New Yorker, and who knows, somebody at the book publishing company probably has a relationship with her. They probably went to the same college. They probably go to the same, or I think she's West Coast now, but they probably went to the same parties in the Hamptons. It's a small industry. When we had our little issue, our agent knows Alex's publisher, and the guy who owns our management, agency knows the editor because they're working on a project together over at HarperCollins, because they represent not just us, but a bunch of other people. And there's books that, they get a deal with Harper, they get it with Hachette, they get it with
small
whatever.
World. Yeah.
It's a very small world, and I think that's how it happened. And I think, unfortunately, Alex probably should have, but he was, he does have this resentment against us so-called Van Halenologists out there, that we're making a buck somehow off the band, that we're parasites or something like that. But he really did need a little bit of that voice to kind of rein it in and bring out the Alex more. And I think because you can see that what's written here, sometimes it comes across as being new to the person who put it down. And talking about Ed's Frankenstein guitar, and saying that he carved a hole out for this front pickup that he put in that was a dummy pickup. Well, first of all, Ed didn't carve the hole in there. That hole was already there. And secondly, that pickup came later, and the red paint came later. And it just there's such a sign of like, I don't know what was going on.
Well, it's interesting.
I think there was a desire, to make a book for a wider audience than just Van
I was
Halen
just about to go there. Yeah.
fans. Yeah, I mean, they probably thought, well, this is, and they were correct. It's a bigger book. They wanted to probably have at least part of it be addressed those hardcore fans, but also a bit for the Oprah crowd, that kind of thing. The nature of the book, much broader. And they
Yeah.
probably trusted somebody like that and would be afraid, say, if it was Chris or I, they might not, feel that we would deliver that side of it. So,
And I don't even think that they needed to actually have us write it. I think it just would have been good to get another set of eyes on there. I mean, if anything, it's just the fact correction, because it wouldn't have made the book any worse at all. In fact, it would have made it that much better, because it's just, there are so many glaring errors, saying that Ted Templeman produced Clapton before, he worked with Van Halen, when actually Ted Templeman didn't work with Clapton until the mid 80s on Behind the Sun.
Behind the Sun, yeah.
It just goes on and on. There's just those little nagging things. Jeff, this is a perfect reference to, you had Lauren Molinar on your show, The Dogs, and you asked him about what was it like to play that show with the Ramones, and like Lauren's like, well, Van Halen canceled. And yet in the book, it's like, we did this show with the Ramones, this punk blowout thing and everything like that. And it's like, well, you obviously looked at the flyer, but you don't remember being there because you weren't there.
Right.
Yeah, that was another great interview, Jeff. Yes.
Sometimes it needs us insider peoples that are their memory, that know this stuff, to just, to bring it into the proper perspective, to really report, again, Alex puts us down by saying, because we weren't, these Van Halenologists that weren't really there. But you wrote it with a person who probably never bought a Van Halen album in her life, and who never attended a Van Halen concert, and probably should know something about the subject that she's been hired to write about, and being paid a very hefty paycheck to do so.
It's clear that the person that he worked with, Ariel Levy, used our book as certainly as a reference to get stories from Al.
It was interesting for me because I'm a fan. Everybody knows I'm a big Van Halen fanboy. I mean, this is why Brad handed over, Eddie to me, because he knew what a fanboy I am, and everything. And
well, not just a fanboy, but Chris, eminently knowledgeable about the inner workings of Ed's playing and his sound.
I'm a guitar geek. I mean, look, I've got EVH amps back behind me and everything. And Ed was who I studied starting as a 15-year-old kid when I first heard, the Van Halen album, the day it was released, and when I went to go see their concerts in 78 with binoculars to see, what gear they were using. I wasn't looking at David Lee Roth's crotch, I was looking at
well,
I was looking at the pedal board.
There, maybe.
I was looking at the pedal board. I was looking at the amps and all that stuff, and that's what my focus was upon, and has been ever since, But it was an interesting sensation because I'm reading the book and I'm enjoying it. I enjoyed really reading about the childhood and the coming up, and there was a lot of stuff in that particular chapter that I hadn't heard before, and I've read pretty much everything out there that you can find. And it was really tickling, to the ego to see Brad and my name mentioned twice in the first chapter right off the bat. But then as things progressed, that kind of turned into this strange sensation of deja vu, and seeing, okay, I recognize this, I recognize that, I gotta say, what opened this whole fucking can of worms was Steve Lukather's shrinking penis. Because there was Alex talking, I kind of started to skim through the book and going, what's going on here? What's going on here? And I come across this quote from Steve Lukather talking about the first time that he heard Eruption and saying like, oh, it just killed me. It's like, how am I going to be able to do anything? How can I compete with that? My penis shrank. And I'm like, I know that. I know that quote. I know exactly where that quote came from. And I went and picked up Eruption, and I went to my Lukather interview, which was done exclusively for the book. I talked with Lukather, and it was hard to get him because he was still in mourning. This was still pretty fresh after Ed died, and he didn't even know if he wanted to talk at all. But I remembered that. I'm just looking at that and going like, wow, this is exactly, what Lukather told me. And there's no reference to where this came from because there's stuff that Lukather said before that. There's stuff that Lukather said after that.
Right.
And it got a little bit of to annoyance, and I enjoyed the insights we got from Alex very much. And don't believe me, I'm not dissing the book. I love the book, and I recommend everybody out there who's even the most casual Van Halen fan to go out and buy it and read it and enjoy it. And I think it's really designed for people who aren't the hardcore fans. I think it's designed more for the general populace, and that's what he should have done. I don't know whether he needed to, retell the Van Halen history as much as he did. And if he was going to refer to disagreeing with the Ted Templeman book, well, I didn't really see too many specifics of where he disagreed. He kind of just said I don't agree with most of what Ted Templeman said, but I agree with this, and it's like, but you're supposed to set the story straight, Alex. Let's hear your take on events. Let's hear what you think about that stuff. He talked about a lot about Noah Monk's book. And it's like, do we really need to have Noah Monk's perspective? You lived that. You're talking about Noah Monk, talking about you, and talking about Ed. And Alex, you were there. What's your take on what was there? What did Noah Monk get wrong in that book? And me as a Van Halen fan can say, I know there's a lot that's wrong in Noah Monk's book. I mean, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but, he brings up finding this Jimi Hendrix poster in Marshall Burrell's office after he vacated from Warner Brothers and saying it was the Van Halen logo. And he inferred that the Van Halen logo was stolen from this Jimi Hendrix poster. Well, Jeff, we've talked about this. It came from a European Jimi Hendrix collection. And actually that Jimi Hendrix logo was a ripoff of the Van Halen logo. I would have liked to seen that kind of insight from Alex, no, we enjoyed your book, but here's where you got it wrong. I would have liked to have seen him kind of go a little bit more head to head with Dave about some of the stuff in Crazy from the Heat, because people don't really remember when that came out, but that raised a bit of a ruckus, about stuff that that Dave was saying and everything. And I would have liked to seen that a little bit more addressed, as opposed to just kind of being repeated as much. But there's a lot of good stuff, and the stuff that's really good too is also just where he goes off the history timeline and ruminates about his relationship with his brother and talks about his feelings and, those interludes that are in there. And I've heard, I haven't heard the audiobook, but I've heard from people that they're tear jerking. You can hear the emotion in his voice and everything. And, but getting back to what happened to Brad and I, it just was a little bit upsetting because there are legal obligations and they weren't fulfilled, but they have been fulfilled. So,
well, I think also that he acknowledged, Alex in the book, or the ghostwriter, acknowledged where they got the material from, from other books, and they never mentioned the name of our book. But we're having that resolved now, and in future editions that'll be rectified. Eruption will be cited. I think the good news, at least for us, for all of this, is that people have sort of taken the, almost independently of anything that we've said, understood that Eruption is sort of a good companion piece to Alex's book, because we've seen the sales of our book really sort of skyrocket as well. So, I think it's all getting worked out. It's all being solved.
I don't want to, and for us, it's really not about the sales, because Brad and I, we made our money, 3 years ago when the book came out. We made our money. We're probably not going to ever see another dime or penny or anything off of this, ever again. So it's not about the money. It was never about the money. We never approached it about the money. It was about credit where credit's due. It's about, the goal that Brad and I had when we did this book, and believe me, Brad and I were not the only writers out there in this universe approaching Ed Van Halen, about doing his authorized biography. That had been my goal basically ever since I started working for a guitar magazine, in the early 90s. That was my goal, was to write Eddie Van Halen's biography at some point, to do that. I know there's a bunch of other people that approached him about it, and Ed never wanted to do it. But, at Guitar World, as you mentioned earlier, we became his conduit to speaking with the public for many years. And it was every year. It was anytime Eddie Van Halen had a project, we were there to talk with him, and we were there to discuss the old albums on their anniversaries. We were there when Van Halen 3 came out and the public lost interest. We were there to cover the tours. We were there to cover every new record and everything. And as you mentioned, I know particularly during the period where I was really in deep with Ed at Guitar World, which is from 2005 on to his death. I was the primary person he spoke with. My combined interviews are probably more than the total of all the other interviews out there that he did at the time. And I had a very close working relationship with Ed. Brad and I, the whole organization, we had a very close working relationship with Ed, where it wasn't that we just did the interview and then it was like, see you later. It was like, okay, the interview's done. I'm sending it back to Ed. Ed, do you want to change anything? Ed, do you want to correct anything? Ed, we worked on it together. I never
fact checking involved.
A lot of fact checking and back and forth and everything. It was a very collaborative process. And it was he approved on everything that went into Guitar World. He approved every single word that was in there. He did not have any issues with it whatsoever. And people don't realize even the skill and the art of doing an interview, is that you need to do your research beforehand. I'll give you a perfect example. Sadly, the last time I spoke with Ed was in 2019 when I was supposed to do, I had actually pitched him on doing an in-depth story on Van Halen 2, like I had done with him a few years earlier in 2014 on the 1984 album. And I talked to Ed and said, like, hey, Ed, I'd really love to do an in-depth article about the making of Van Halen 2 and just about that time period and everything like that. And Ed was like, well, Chris, I really don't remember anything about then. Can you do me a favor and can you write down 30 or 40 questions and write me a little history, just to jog my memory? And it's like, sure, and that's what I did, and I had gone off. I had already had a trip scheduled to Japan for 3 weeks, so I vanished off into the Far East, and forgot about it. And while I was gone, I missed an email message from Janie saying, like, we need to cancel. But that's another story. But basically, Ed was coming to me saying, like, I don't remember. I'm counting on you. And people don't realize that. They think we just, as journalists, just show up and we sit down with a tape recorder and turn it on and say, go. That's not what we do. And the goal with Brad and I of doing this book was to write Eddie Van Halen's autobiography as close as anyone will ever get. And we licensed out stuff from Steve Rosen that filled holes that we didn't particularly have, especially about some of those early albums that I was trying to do in retrospect and fill out. That was actually the goal of doing Van Halen 2. And next thing was going to be Women and Children First. And then especially Fair Warning. Oh my God, I wanted so bad to talk about Fair Warning in depth because there really is not great coverage of one of the most important, most beloved from a guitarist perspective albums out there, Fair Warning. There's just not a whole lot about that record out there. I just wanted to go through the whole gamut. And but Rosen had that stuff and some other people had some stuff, and we licensed that stuff out. We paid people for that. Vic Garbarini covered the Van Halen 3 area very well at Guitar World. We licensed that out, and we wrote Ed's autobiography. We wrote his biography as if it was an autobiography, using his own words for 60-70% of the book.
Well, I want to just clarify, because when I said that Alex's book has helped the sales of our book, I mean, I guess I'm not so much talking about it from like, oh my God, now we're making more money. I mean, we worked super hard on that book, and it's gratifying. You do it for the money, but you want people to read this stuff too. I mean, you spend many years of your life working, putting together this information.
And that's the bottom line. That's really what we want. And that's why we felt like a little bit shortchanged that it wasn't mentioned in Alex's, because, can't go to the New York Times and say, like, do an interview with us. We can't go to NPR and have them do an interview with us. Like, Alex is getting all this great press and everything. We don't have that celebrity power behind us to do that. And it just would be nice for people to be able to get Ed's perspective, because it's sad. Ed's gone. He's never going to do an autobiography. And our book is really, that covers the whole history of the band.
But I do think, Chris, to some degree, that is being recognized.
Oh yeah, no, it's being recognized. I agree.
It is being recognized,
and that's the good thing.
I think all four formats of our book are in the top 100 of Amazon's best rock books now, and I think people that's been the positive thing about Alex's book, is that people have gone back and rediscovered our book and see how well that they fit together.
Yeah.
And I do think, that's sort of been the cool thing about, being, so much of our material being used in Alex's book, is that it sort of confirms the accuracy of our reporting.
Yeah.
It's he doesn't have any issues with it, and used it to help him jog his own memories
exactly
of his brother and what his brother had said. So, it was surprising, but, for me, in another way, I look at it as like saying, confirmation of the accuracy of our reporting. So, and then he used it to sort of embellish his own memories, So together, it's a great thing. And I'm sort of proud of the fact that we were being used as a reference for Al to help him, bring up the emotional sort of content of his book. And I think that that's ultimately the great thing about the Alex book is, the facts are the facts, but, to hear how he actually felt about these things and how he viewed them. Me personally, my favorite factoid in Alex's book was that they were microdosing LSD while they were recording 1984.
Yeah.
like I'm wondering, what's more intense, David Lee Roth? Lee Roth while you're on LSD.
Right. Maybe he makes sense when you're on LSD.
Yeah.
Oh, he does. He does.
Hey, I got a question for you guys, though. Are you surprised that HarperCollins, their legal department, Ariel Levy, didn't pick up on that? Because, they did, I'm sure they would have done their vetting and say, okay.
I want to talk about that, because I think it's on Ariel first and foremost as the person. Alex was not sitting down at a computer typewriter banging out words. He sat down and did interviews with Ariel, and that was it at the end of the day. It was on her to really do the due diligence. It was on her editor to do the due diligence. It was on the HarperCollins legal department to do the due diligence on that, and they dropped the ball. And it wasn't just us. It was I had gone through, when we needed to present a case, just to ask again for credit where credit is due. We weren't shaking them down for not a single penny. It was just credit, as is properly required by fair use laws. There was other sources out there. I stumbled across. I was actually surprised because I didn't even know about this interview. There was something that was done, I believe, in 1988. It was in Japan, and I found it on the internet when I was comparing, quotes and everything like that, because there's a bunch of unattributed quotes throughout the book, and it was like, oh wow, I didn't know about this. I'm going to go back and read the whole thing now, But it would have been nice to have that footnote right there, or the bibliography in the back of the book.
But I will say that we did bring this to their attention, and they are rectifying it. So
yeah, that's good to know.
And they did so quickly and without
instantly.
Yeah,
within 24 hours. Within 24 hours,
cool.
They admitted that we had made a mistake, and they are fixing it, and all is good. And that's the way it should have been up front. We missed an opportunity here with a very large chunk of the first printing of the book that went out that won't have that. in it, and whatever. We don't want to. We wouldn't want to in the first place. I mean, come on, you can't call back and recall books, you know, and
But
whatever.
but I do think people again are picking up on the fact that both books work together really
Yeah.
well. And
Yeah.
it's being reflected in the numbers on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and a bunch of other places.
Bring up one issue though, because we got some blowback, and everything, and I do want to talk about one legal nerd thing, and it's just like people say, like, you can't own someone else's quotes. Well, that's just not how it works. And, basically we put out a copyrighted product with the book, and, Brad and I, as the authors of that, we own that. We're responsible. Even if somebody else says something, that might be slanderous or whatever. And if we print it, then we're responsible for that. But the bigger point of that all is that it's been proven legally. It was just proven in a 2023 court case where Bob Woodward was sued about putting out an audio book of interviews. And the subject who he interviewed said, like, you don't own that. But by the person giving the consent to do the interview, they're relinquishing that, to your responsibility, to your ownership of such from a legal standpoint. Now, that person can go and say exactly those same words to somebody else. That happened to me. That, in fact, it happens in the book, where there's a point where Ed's talking about drinking. It was a quote, and I'm reading it and going like, and I remember this because it was from my interview with Ed for Balance, but that in the book wasn't. It was from Tom Boujour's interview in Guitar World at the time on the Balance album. But Ed, we both interviewed Ed around the same time, and Ed basically gave both of us the same interview, just the word order was changed around. So, so yes, he can say it to someone else and he can say it in a different manner or whatever. He can even say the exact same words, and it's kind of a weird situation. But to get to the point, the example I like to compare to people say, like, you can't own a quote. It's the equivalent of Ed playing the guitar solo on Michael Jackson's Beat It, which we'll get into. But Ed consented to show up in the studio at Westlake and bring his gear and play the solo and edit it and all this other stuff. But once the Thriller album came out, who gets the copyrights? Michael Jackson. And Alex Van Halen can't go back and say, like, that's my brother's guitar playing, and I'm going to take a sample. I'm going to isolate it and take a sample of it and put it onto a Van Halen song. You can't do that. You've got to clear it. And in that case, money will change hands. All we get as bottom feeders of the history and biography writers and stuff, if you want to use our stuff, all you have to do is credit it. And that's it. You just have to say it came from here. That's it.
It was an interesting choice of outlets to do the interviews that Alex did too. It was selective because there were people asking us, why didn't the Van Halen News Desk get an interview with Al, which would be great. But it's like they're reaching an audience outside of the fan base.
No, they're going for the mainstream.
Yeah, they've already sold a book with us. The Van Halen News Desk readers are going to buy it, so there's no need to.
There's no need to. Yeah.
But having said that, it would have been cool though to be able to at least have a chat with Al and say anything you want to say to the fans that you haven't said to the other outlets.
Here's another thing that people don't know about the book that Brad and I did is that we reached out to Alex to be included in the book, to do an interview with us, to examine the book, like I'm talking about here, to go through it before we went to print and say, like, I want to correct this, I don't agree with this or whatever. And we could maybe argue with him about it or whatever, or debate it if we felt strongly enough about it. But we offered that to them. I reached out to Wolfgang, to do an interview about it. And he said, he wanted to talk about his first album. He didn't want to talk about his dad. And even if I did do an interview with him about the first album, I couldn't use it anywhere else. Every other writer in the world could, but I couldn't use my own interview with him. So I politely declined, but they saw our book after it came out. We asked them even after the fact, is there anything you don't like here? Is there anything you want to change? And there was only one particular passage that they asked us to remove. And that got removed from the paperback. It's still in the hardcover because, we couldn't pull that off the market.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
But the family, by and large, thought what we did was fair and accurate. And
it shows in Alex's book too that, at least the parts they got that they got from us that they used rather in a wholesale fashion. There's stuff from our book in every chapter except chapter 14. That at least I could find from a very quick, scan through. But so obviously they agreed with it enough to use it quite frequently throughout the book and everything. And, just what I'm getting here though is it really, I get that, but it's like they could have done, even if they got a writer, I can't remember the name, like a Grail Marcus or whoever, they could have gotten a rock journalist who's also, just known as being a very good literary type of writer that can communicate with the public, that can communicate to the lowest common denominator and everything, that isn't a music geek or a Van Halen geek or whatever, that does go to the fucking Hamptons parties and whatever, that would have been preferable. And it would have been a much, I'm not dissing the book or anything like that, but it just, I do have, I guess my thing is just as a guy, as a historian and a fact checker and everything like that, that stuff was kind of irresponsible and sloppy and lazy, and there's photo captions that are wrong. There's a supposed whiskey flyer that was printed up as a sticker in 2017. You can even see there's the copyright 2017 if you look at the margin. It's just sloppy.
I'm looking through it now. I got it up in front of me. Which photo is not credited correctly?
It's not a photo. It's a picture of a supposed whiskey a go-go like street poster or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's a brand new creation created in 2017. It was created by Live Nation as merch.
Right.
Your father Pops was a good-looking dude. Look at that shot of him.
Yeah.
Jan in his early days. The Trojan Rubber Company. There's the.
Okay. Oh no! Don't start me because you're gonna pull me. You're gonna pull me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Checking.
What did I do?
Don't do it, guys.
No.
Don't do it.
Oh no!
That picture says 1971. Okay. How old would Eddie Van Halen be in 1971? He'd be 16 years old. Look at that kid wearing that cap. Is that kid 16 years old?
No, he looks like he's 13, 14.
Okay, maybe? I'm a Van Halen nerd, and I know this stuff. I know exactly when that picture was taken, and I know there's a whole series of photos, and Ed's playing the red Univox 12-string guitar, which he traded in 1969 to get his gold top Les Paul. So that picture is either 1968 or 1969. And you turn to the other page, and there's the graduation photos. And it's like, I didn't know that Alex and Eddie Van Halen graduated from high school at 16 years old, because in California, it's typically 17 or 18.
Yeah. You talk about this one?
Yeah. It's like, and they say, that's my graduation picture in 1969. And it's like, oh, that's weird because you look older in that picture than the picture on the previous page where you say it's 1971.
Oh,
did you find the Fountain of Youth?
I'm sorry, man. I got you started. I'm sorry. Blame me.
and the book is full of this type of stuff, and it's like, oh.
But that's how all of you out there know Eruption is completely or as accurate as we could have gotten.
Yeah, and there's stuff I'm such an asshole, that I can look back at Eruption and say like, oh, I got that wrong, because you know what? Over the convening years, stuff has come out of the woodwork. Thanks.
The truth is I appreciate you, Chris.
Yeah, we all do.
But Jeff, you've done this stuff, and again, you did that thing with Lauren. And when Lauren said like he confirmed it, it's like, yeah, Van Halen pulled out of that show.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh man, it's like, yeah, because I've read it and I've heard that, and from all indications I've seen, Van Halen did not play that show. But here's Alex saying we played in the show, and people are gonna say, well, Alex was there. He was there, and it's like, well was he? Was he out projecting?
Isn't that like, there was Noel Monk. I really think he took shots at Greg, when his book, about his book, and there's the perspective of, when you're interviewing somebody, and then there's the perspective of what you see when you're with that person. There's their perspective, which is their own view of it, Alex's view of it, but then
it's a different kind of truth.
But then there's
exactly.
Lauren, right? But then there's Lauren's view of what happened, and he was there, and knew this band, and all of a sudden there's this disparity between two. But
you're so right, Jeff. Yeah,
and I don't want to criticize Lauren because I don't want to decrease my argument that Van Halen, because he said Eulogy was the replacement band and everything like that. But Lauren also in that interview he says like, we did this gig, with Quiet Riot and Van Halen, and I think he conflated two different gigs that he did at the Starwood, into one.
Right.
You know, because we only know of one instance where Van Halen actually did a show, and that was the Glendale show that they did with Quiet Riot, and where they shared the bill.
Right. Right.
So
yeah, so it's all
Yeah.
about memory and about,
the
it's hard
brain
to,
is a strange organ, and that's why we all love psychedelic drugs so much. Is because you know what,
Yeah.
we can see the sky open and the lizards crawling out from the rocks and everything like
And
that.
everybody
Did that
out
actually
there,
happen?
in celebration of 1984, we all microdosed.
right.
Before we did this podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Well, you said this offline though, that they said in the book they say they were microdosing LSD or whatever
Yes, yeah.
during the recording of 1984.
But just to add to
I'm kidding.
Right.
to add to the comment I made, I was disappointed
But
in
Jeff,
Dave that
you're
he
turning into you're turning into a Wolverine as I watch.
I was disappointed in Dave, putting the kibosh on that tribute tour. But to that, it's like I would love to hear his side of it, because we've just heard Alex's comment. So I wish Dave would just make a comment in response rather than putting out, Pop-Tarts and
He ain't gonna
Kool-Aid or whatever
get
the fuck
that's,
he's doing.
that's, that ain't
Yeah,
the way
it's just
David is
Dave,
wired.
But hey,
he ain't wired that way.
Yeah, tell us what's your side of it is. We want to know to give you a fair
look. If you could you want to get the most powerful psychedelic drug in the world, get some David Lee Roth blood and inject it into you, because that's where the heart of Carlos Castaneda exists.
And I'll say this though, for the record, as much as Ed's done for me with the sound of his guitar, I've never been entertained like I have watching Dave. I was just watching the Montreal show from '84. I wish they would just put a pro shot from the '84 or any of the tours, but that '84 tour is like, motherfucker, that's a band.
Yeah,
that's a fucking band.
I'm going to be a bit of a jerk here, because
Here's from your book, guys. Well, there you go. That's a great shot
Alex
of it.
brings up, we look at what would Led Zeppelin do? You look at Led Zeppelin and blah blah blah. What would Led Zeppelin do? What did Led Zeppelin do? Led Zeppelin did this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Jimmy Page
West was one.
did this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got that.
Led Zeppelin did this.
And the reissues, the deluxe editions,
let's talk about what Led Zeppelin would do. They have put out stuff. They have engaged us. And
really great live record would be.
Look, Greg Renoff confirmed this. Greg Renoff confirmed this with Don Landy. Okay, 1981. Gosh, what a peak period for the band. Well, they did shoot the video stuff. Only exists for the 3 songs that they're promoting, because video crews are expensive. But concurrently with recording the videos, they recorded the entire shows with a mobile truck on multi-track. And those tapes are out there.
Who was it just saying that Michael Anthony has all of them too? He's got like a ton of shit at his.
Well, he probably has like stereo masters or whatever, but the multi-tracks are out there.
Oh.
That 1980, those 2 1981 Oakland shows are out there. Instant live album. And put it out, warts and all.
Yeah.
Just put it out, warts and all, because you know what? Give us raw, uncut, X-rated, triple X-rated Van Halen.
Yeah, because that band was on
Jeff,
fire.
Is there a single show that or bootleg that you know of that you find definitive?
The Pasadena one, the one towards the signing right after they've been signed.
Pasadena Civic.
Yeah, the Civic show. Yeah. That's one of the best quality ones that's out there.
And that's the birth of Frankenstein.
Right.
Mm.
And
that's the first bootleg I ever bought. Bought it at a record store in Waterbury, Connecticut. I still have it here. I still have the bite marks from my cat biting on the side of it. No, what are you doing?
There are a bunch of them though.
The record survived. That's a great show.
A few of them were pressed, including that one to vinyl. And it had been circulated over the years.
The vinyl version, yeah.
There's vinyl versions out there, but
yeah,
that first that Pasadena show that was recorded was right there. When Ted Templeman comes in there, I think that night, right, Chris, and then they yell out to him and on over.
Michael does.
Yeah,
this one's for you, Ted. Yeah.
Was that the later? Was that after they finished the album?
It might have been that one.
Okay, yeah, because there's the February 18th show. That's the birth of Frankenstein. But there was the show that was basically the hometown send off.
December show.
It was like October or something like that, something like that. I think it was October.
The 84 show, the 1984 tour, like a lot of that was, sort of chaotic.
It was.
Yeah.
I have bootlegs that I bought in Japan of the videos and stuff, which are all on YouTube now, and you don't even have to buy them. That 84 was a spectacle to see, and a really great professionally shot video of that would be incredible, because that was just.
Yeah.
You saw that, Jeff, right? You went to that tour?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, it was just like you walked in and like the stage was just a metropolis.
Yeah.
Of just stacks of speakers and lights, and it was just like it was like the Close Encounters thing when they fired up those lights, man. It was just like it was unreal. I've never seen a show as big and pompous and just a state tent than that stage set, and I've seen some great shows. I've saw the Pink Floyd The Wall concerts, when they did the only, New York and LA and everything. But that was just amazing. But I personally, there's that bootleg out there of the show I was at, October 6th, 79 Van Halen 2 tour. That's actually pretty darn good quality. And that could be cleaned up. And allegedly, Roth was going out on that tour and saying they were recording, but I believe that they were recording.
You know what? I'm not sure if I could say who saw it, but there was a very prominent lead guitar player who says he was at Roth's house. You can kind of deduce who this is because Roth only deals with so many famous guitar players who saw the videos, the 80s pro shots, maybe even could be some 70s pro shots in there.
Look, we know that there's some stuff out there. They were too big of a band. Look at how many pictures there are of Van Halen in the club days,
right.
And that's not common. I mean, compare that to how many pictures there are of Quiet Riot in the club days. There's hardly any compared to Van Halen. People were following them around.
It's not like Robert Johnson, 1930 something.
No.
There's like two photos of it. There's only two known photos of David Lee Roth.
It was the 70s, and the 70s was the era of where every band put out a live album. Sometimes they put out a live album after every other studio album.
Yeah.
Blue Oyster Cult, for example, I think had like 3 live albums come out in the course of like 5 years. It's just
Your feet are on your knees.
That's one of the great
UFO, that live album.
On Your Feet or On Your Knees, one of the all-time great underrated jam band records, because Buck Dharma is just on fire on that.
Yes.
Boogie, man. Buck's Boogie.
Buck's Boogie. The whole Yardbirds thing, that's a whole other thing.
Speaking to that, though, Alex talked about how he loved Zeppelin. However, he was disappointed that they didn't play the songs like they were on the record. I would personally, I love that. I mentioned earlier, I love the Dead, so I would have loved to see that. I get it. I know there are a lot of people. I always hear people complain when I remember one time somebody went to see Tom Petty. Hey, he doesn't play it like it is on the record. I'm like, yeah, but that's fucking live. I want to hear like in 07 when they broke into 07, they break into during Somebody Get Me Doctor. They break into what the hell was it?
I'm So Glad.
No, on the 07 tour, they went into Magic Bus, I think, right? They go into Magic Bus. Right. And they're just jamming, I know
that was the common fixture of their shows. I mean, that's the Eagle show. I don't remember what they go into, because they do You Really Got Me, and You Really Got Me just turns into a long extended jam at the end.
Love that shit.
I've forgotten about that. They used to do that stuff.
The Oz Festival, they do that.
I'll tell you that one of the most surprising moments I ever had in any interview with Ed was I did this one interview, and actually Al takes a bit out of this for his book, where I just talked about like the band playing live. That was sort of the focus, and I started asking them questions about like bands that they went to see when they were growing up. And one thing I was sort of thrilled to get out of Ed was he said how much he loved Jethro Tull.
Oh, that's awesome.
I was a huge Jethro Tull fan, and if you saw them back,
same here.
They were just an incredible live band. But you sort of never expect Ed.
No.
But on the other hand, when you think about what Ed really loved, which was like really sort of progressive music and cool stuff. It's perfect, but
Wow.
I
Yeah,
got a kick out of that.
you won't find a bigger Tull fan than my older brother Marty, man. I mean, just huge fan. So I'll tell
I got to
him
go
that.
back to the fact checking thing because this is another very important big
Yep.
point, and only a flipping in the weeds, flipping nerd like me is going to do the work on this type of thing.
Does this have anything to do with Aqualung?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with Aqualung, but
Is he doing guest guitar work on that?
But okay, there's a passage in the book where, and unfortunately, I know other people believe this too, and I hate to be the bringer of bad news sometimes, but it has a bright side. There's a silver lining to this cloud. Talking about Ed's legendary Marshall that he got, in '71, that came from the Rose Palace. And the story of the Rose Palace is that it really wasn't a live music venue for very long. It really they only hosted shows there during 1969 and 1970, and the amp was a 1968 amp, so there couldn't have been any earlier shows. And Alex says in the book that Jimi Hendrix played through this amp, and it's like, I'm sorry, Alex, Jimi Hendrix never played at the Rose Palace in Pasadena. In '69, Jimi Hendrix was playing at the LA Forum. That's how big he was. He was playing arena shows. He wasn't playing the smaller 3,000 seat type of venue places. So Jimi Hendrix was huge. So sorry, Alex, it's impossible. That he played there. But who did play there in 1969? Led Zeppelin. And you know what? I have a picture of John Paul Jones standing on stage at the Rose Palace with a Marshall head that has no logo on it behind him. It's the Rose Palace house amp. And you know who was plugged into it that you don't see to the other side? Jimmy Page.
Wow.
Jimmy Page played through that amp. So yeah, maybe it's not Hendrix, but it's still got some Zoso mojo.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's still something, and you check the list of the people who have played there, because we have these resources now in the crazy age of the internet, that you have this list of, and there's some pretty decent bands that might have also played through it, but sadly, Jimi Hendrix was not one of them.
Yeah.
And Van Halen never played Perkins Palace.
Through that, Marshall? That's what I want to know.
What's that?
I said, Ian Anderson, did he play his flute through that, Marshall?
I think he played a different type of flute through it. So.
Hey, I want to know what your favorite era tone-wise is of Eddie, because I was listening to Foreign Lawful last night, and I just like, man, I fucking love that tone from the Sammy era. Of course, during the Dave era, there's, I guess I would have to go with the Fair Warning. But
yeah,
you have
I'm kind of a Fair Warning guy.
Yeah.
I think it's just
I thought the 04 tone was interesting on those songs. Like,
push comes to
it's
shove.
about time.
For me, it's just like, because it's that's where I can see Ed being an LA studio guy, because he just goes into that jazzy little sort of semi Holdsworthian, LA fusion guy kind of solo there, and it's really slinky.
On what we're talking
on Push Comes to Shove.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
There.
Yes.
Yes. It's like a saxophone. It's like a horn instrument. It's reedy,
right.
And everything. And his playing is super expressive, but the tone's really fat and voluptuous, and it's just like, oh gosh, this is just, and there's the harder stuff too. I mean, as much as Ed complains about the damn reverb on the first album, that album still just to get the goosebumps every time I hear it. I want to go break shit. I want to go drive my car 120 miles. I want to get my old 72 Camaro.
Who here? I got a speeding ticket. Listen to A Different Kind of Truth. Back from New York. I did. It was Bullethead, by the way. Yeah. I'm like, motherfucker, yeah. And they see an out of state license plate, and they're like, yeah.
You know what song really gets me though, and it also Fair Warning. Is it Fair Warning? Yeah, I'm just, my brain's turning to mush now because we've been talking too long.
Yeah, this is a marathon. Here we go. Dirty movies.
That song just every time, but it's really not just the guitar. It's the whole thing. There's just something about that. The vocals, the vocal arrangement on that. There's just something about that song, because it's got something about it. I don't even know what it's, the je ne sais quoi. It's just I hear that, and it just kind of, it brings,
I don't want anybody else's
smile
voice
to my
on
face
this.
for other reasons, but it does something to me on a gut emotional level.
Dave's voice is, I don't want anybody else's voice on those songs.
it just
Gotta defend Dave.
There's a hugeness to it. There's something like it almost sounds like the, for lack of a better term, like the Zeppelins with the attack guns coming up over the horizon or something to me. It's just like in the tanks behind them.
Yeah.
It's just like we're Van Halen and we're here.
Yeah.
He complained
about you guys.
He complained about those drum sounds on that first album, through the book,
Yeah, the pillow. He put a pillow in it.
Yeah, talking about all that.
Bass.
But I've actually pulled those, the stems that have been out there for years now, and I've put them in my DAW and replaced them with modern sounds, just to see what they'd sound like. Let's fix the bass. Let's fix the drum. And when I finish, I'm like, this sounds like crap.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Sammy had to reach out to
overlook, because we've heard all this stuff a zillion times.
Right.
It gets a little old, but you can't overlook sort of what he achieved on 1984 either. I mean, there's a certain kind of, it's a little less reckless sounding, but there's a certain kind of balance between the clarity.
Yeah.
And he didn't quite get lost in the processing like he did on the Sammy Hagar era records. Sure. I just, as soon as the chorus comes in, I sort of check out a little bit. But 1984, Hot for Teacher, all that stuff sounds good. Panama.
Looking back, I feel like House of Pain and Girl Gone Bad are like gifts to the hardcore fans. Like, got the jump, got all weight, got some pop stuff in here. Here you go. I listen to those more now than I think I listened to the rest of the album. And it was the reverse as a kid. Like, there was a friend of mine that had that.
That is like the progressive stuff. And then
House of Pain.
House of Pain is for the hardcore. It's an early song of theirs, and it's heavy, and that's kind of what the direction they were going in with Mark Stone, was really
not Mike Stone, who Dave called him Mike Stone in his book, didn't he?
Oh, geez. Well, yeah. You don't get me into the fact checking.
Sorry.
Do you have another hour?
I'm sorry. I'll turn my mic off.
And Chris, on 1984, was it the original Marshall on that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It was. I think it was getting tired at that point. But that's, I think, part of the reason why it's not quite as gritty and nasty sounding. And I don't know. Maybe it was just the fact that he was using the voltage that he was getting fed to the house. We know how temperamental these things can be with voltages and everything. So that's part of the allure and the frustration of tube amps, is that one day they sound great and the other day they don't. And it's like, I've got a little thing down here that monitors my voltage coming into my house. And sometimes it's at 125. Other days it's like at 118,
But I don't think Ed let anything on that record that he didn't want.
Oh, no, definitely not. No.
I think that sound on 1984, whether you like it or not, is intentional. It's a little cleaner, and it sort of is the pathway to where he was.
I'm saying the byproduct is that the amp was just getting a little tired out, but not in a bad way. It was just a little bit it's been like it mellowed. It was like a wine, and it's like in those earlier years, it's a little bit more brash, and it's got the harsh tannins on it, and everything. I actually, that's what I loved about Al in the book, was when he talked about wine, because he said, this guy knows his wine. He's not drinking Smoking Loon. Al's drinking the good stuff.
I tried Smoking Loon. I had the worst hangover ever.
Al, you missed your opportunity, because I've got a really killer wine collection, and we could have wrote a book. We could have wrote a book over some decent old Burgundy and some old.
Well, you've seen that book, Chris. Have you seen that book about like the wine pairing with the rock songs?
Oh yeah.
It seems to be in the top 10 for like ever and ever.
It's always there. Always there.
Just definitely just sit down and do like a wine pairing with Van Halen.
No, true.
That's true. Your next book, dude.
Yeah.
How much did you guys know about Jan being the origins of the Brown sound? Was that something you already knew about?
I thought that was a really cool observation.
Right.
That was a very cool observation.
Yeah, I'd
It
never
sounded like wood, the way you described it.
Oh, and that again comes to my push comes to shove thing. It sounds like, when it plays that solo, it sounds like a wind instrument.
Yes.
It doesn't even sound like a brass instrument. It doesn't sound like a sax. It's reedy, it's woody.
Yeah. And seeing their dad working on this stuff all the time inspired them to tinker with their instruments, and that's where they got it from. They didn't have a lot of money, so that's why Eric got that whole idea of just creating things out of whatever he had in front of him.
Super insightful.
Eric, I have to say that was, to me, like one of the highlights of the book.
Okay.
That observation.
Real curious if you guys had known about that.
Yeah, but that was very expository. That was just really that was definitely a key kind of a eureka type of moment. And because
back to the really theme of how much the dad plays a role in this book.
We got from was like, that dad was a really great musician and everything like that. And he brought us out to play these gigs when we were kids, and, but we didn't get that insight, that Ed never expressed that level of insight about that. And that was cool. That was super cool from a musician.
I like that stuff where they were talking about, he was talking about the drummer that his dad played with, Max. And he was kind of talking about how these guys kind of took him under their wing, and And another thing that Alex did a lot in this book at least for me, as a business, music is a business, as a musician working a business, he highlights that a lot. Like, how do you got to go about it? What's the whole things you need to be thinking?
Right.
About? He does a lot of that stuff that his dad sort of taught him.
The work ethic.
Right, and all
the working man's approach to it. It's like a job. Like they go to they're in the line, they're standing in line at all these dudes in their 50s, and they're at the height of their ass. They're just staring at their, but they see like the worn out backs of their pants. Are just, we're not going to be that. But at the same time, you work to put food on the table. You play to put food on the table, and that mindset. I think that's also where I think there was a respect for Dave there. Like Dave had that work ethic, even though he came from a family with money.
But he also said, he was talking about, how
putting the hours in.
You're talking about how Dave was mixing his influences in, and how Alex and him kind of saw that you had to make the crowd. It wasn't obviously we love the Holsworth, but
but he made together.
But he was talking about how to appeal to the wider audience, and how that.
But putting that Holdsworth thing to put it in there a little bit,
yeah.
And that's why they had such a huge audience. They bring in people like myself, bring in guys like yourself who are into the gear and all that. That's what makes them so great. It's
peel across. And obviously, when Ed married Valerie, it brought in this whole other faction. It's interesting that some of the ladies that I talked to who were fans, they were really focused on that romantic relationship, and that brought a lot of ladies to appreciate him, and other people, like nobody would know his name probably if it wasn't for that. Some people would.
And it didn't help, it didn't hurt that they were good looking. Like Ed and Dave, the girls always loved both. And when I was in high school, either they loved Ed or they loved Dave. The girls always wanted to be with either one.
It's a rare thing though that all the guys loved them too, as much as the girls.
Guy wanted, you wanted to be that dude. You want, that's interesting to know too, because Dave was always cool as shit in his interviews, but Eddie too. Like Eddie was fucking cool, man. He was chill. You didn't know I had no idea back before the internet and all this stuff that he had all these insecurities, because he was a cool motherfucker. I mean, he really was. He just had that laid back vibe to him, and he was just always that smile, and just there's a happiness about him. There was just this happiness that to me, that's why I love Jump. Jump is, that song never fails to still to this day make me happy every time I hear it.
He talks about the video, he talks about the vibe of that video and how it came across, and it captured people.
So cool.
It doesn't mention Pete Angelus.
No mention of Pete Angelus.
Right. That's weird.
Getting back to that upbeat thing, I've always thought one of the hardest things to do, as a songwriter, is to write a happy rock song. Fucking impossible, really difficult. I mean, and that was the key to the Beatles, is they could write a upbeat sort of happy rock song and still have it be a rock song. I don't know. Can you guys think of any other band other than Van Halen in the hard rock world that,
Well, no, hard rock, no.
yeah,
No.
Pop punk, like
maybe
Green
like
Day or
sort of like
whatever, is kind
Cheap
of
Trick a
happy
little
music.
bit,
Cheap
that,
Trick, yeah.
Cheap Trick, true. Yeah, Cheap Trick, definitely. Yeah,
yeah, I
but
mean,
they're power pop.
yeah,
That's a kind of a whole different thing. I mean, power
but
pop.
Van Halen in some ways was half power pop as well.
No,
Yeah.
definitely. They that's the thing, is that they bridged the gap, and a lot of the glam hair bands didn't quite capture that. I mean, it happens with any band where it's like, I mean, look at all the Led Zeppelin knockoffs, and what are they doing? Okay, this band's Led Zeppelin too. This band is Houses of the Holy or whatever. They kind of missed this whole picture, though. They missed Led Zeppelin 3.
Ugh, that's the way.
And
Tangerine. Fucking love those songs.
It's just
Yeah.
and they did reach this kind of, it was them. It was just,
Yeah.
they reached this magical combination, and it did cross over things. And they talk about, it's like, yeah, of course, the definition of heavy metal has changed so much, and even Alex kind of talks about it in the book. Like, there was no hard rock in 1974. Well, bullshit. There was a ton of hard rock in 1974. Yeah, it wasn't getting on the cover of Rolling Stone, but that's no gauge to go by. I mean, Rolling Stone was always kind of like, for an older generation.
They
Then
always did hard rock.
they were behind the curve. I mean, when I was reading Rolling Stone in the late 70s, they were putting the Blues Brothers and Star Wars on the cover.
Yeah.
So yeah, they weren't putting Van Halen on the cover until later or whatever. But he talks about that, and it's like, well, gosh, it's like, yeah, there was no hard rock, but there still was Black Sabbath around. There still was like Edgar Winter's Frankenstein. It ain't that heavy. That riff is fucking heavy.
Yeah.
There was a lot. There was a lot of there was a lot of proto metal around. Black Sabbath opened up that door, and a whole bunch of other people walked through it.
And when Alex is talking about
Multiple.
1974, we have that Pasadena High School recording, and yes, there was heavy music, and you know what? You were heavy music.
Yeah.
You were making it, so it was there, and that was, you guys were still, there's a lot of original music on that recording, but there's also covers, and some of that stuff came from earlier years, and it's heavy. So, and I just know, I always kind of bristles me a little bit when people kind of brush off and kind of.
There was Crazy Horses by the Osmonds.
Yeah, exactly. But people talk about the 70s as if it was
The
just
Osmonds.
so monolithic, and that this was going on and this was going on. It was disco, and then it was punk. And punk, was really not very mainstream at all. I know, because I was kind of a heavy metal / punk rocker kid. I would wear my Black Sabbath shirt to school one day, and I would wear my Ramones shirt the next day and get in a fight with surfers, and everything and whatever. But it's like, hey, I was there at the sports arena going to see these bands, going to see your UFOs and your Blue Oyster Cults. And, even Boston wasn't heavy metal per se, but they had a hard rock sound that it was
Foreigner.
the guitar sound. Yeah, even Foreigner.
Bad Company.
Stuff. And that's not metal, but, the definite, I mean, Blue Oyster Cult, I got into this argument with people because Blue Oyster Cult was considered a heavy metal band during the 70s.
Oh yeah, it was those first two records. Oh my God! Cities on Flame with rock and roll.
Cities on Flame with rock and roll.
Riff, yeah. What a riff! And the umlauts on the band.
And in hindsight, everybody kind of because heavy metal got heavier, but it also kind of got a little bit more compartmentalized and became like, it has to be like this and everything. But there was a ton of hard rock music, and there was a ton of kids going out there. And yes, the mainstream was ignoring it, and that was exactly the way we wanted it, because we didn't want our parents knowing about what we were doing.
But
yes.
Back to Eric's point, the magic or the interesting thing was about Van Halen was they were able to do metal and still put a smile on your face.
Yeah.
And I think that's really
so cool.
Because my God, that first Van Halen album was just as heavy as anything coming out, and that's why they blew Black Sabbath off the stage in 1978.
Yeah. Hey, but before I forget, I just interviewed this morning a guy who wrote a book on the band Sparks, really like a duo. There's the brothers.
Yeah, I know them.
Van Halen opened for them?
Yes, they opened for them.
Oh my God.
Oh, you're gonna drag me into the fact checking thing again.
I did it again.
God damn it.
This would have been like 76, I think, maybe.
No. They opened
77?
They opened for them. If my recollection is good, it was New Year's Eve 1976 going into 1977.
Okay.
If I remember properly, I think that was the gig. It may be sometime around then. It was definitely before they opened for Santana. I think it was at the Santa Monica Civic. But in the book, Alex doesn't give a date, or I'm sorry, Ariel Levy. I'm going to say her name wrong probably, so fuck it. But whoever gets it wrong, bringing in, we opened for Santana, we did this, thing at the Whiskey, and we opened for Nils Lofgren. Well, Nils Lofgren was March of 77, around the same time as that alleged Ramones gig. I think it was like March 18th or something like that at the Santa Monica Civic. So that was wrong. But yeah, they opened for Sparks.
Wow, Sparks.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think they had just...
Hey, do yourself a favor. And whatever you know about the new wave, KROQ, rock of the 80s, Sparks, throw that in the dump and go out and get yourself a copy of Kimono My House.
Okay, Kimono My House, because I love Big Beat.
Oh,
that's got a lot of guitar. No. That's harder.
Kimono My House is glam rock, and it's like Queen.
Yeah.
And it's got
enough for the both of us.
Yeah. I listened to all of that. It's like Bohemian Rhapsody. Yeah, I was listening to a lot of the music. So when I was getting ready to interview the author, I wanted to make sure I listened to them. I was like, oh, this is a fucking good. I keep saying group band, but it was really the two brothers. But they had Giorgio Moroder.
It was. I'm trying to remember the name of the guitar player with them. The guitar player was a beast.
Yes. We made note of the guitars.
That band that they had, those records that they did with that band. Mankey. I'm trying to remember
Jeffrey Salen was the guitarist on one of the albums.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who was on Kimono My House.
Oh, I could look it up here.
They had a killer band. And they did a couple records, and those records, you go out and get that stuff.
Yeah.
70s sort of glam rock.
I forget there's a story behind that album title. He told me, I forget it already, but it was a good story. But let's see the personnel on that album. Oh, Adrian Fisher?
Yeah, Adrian Fisher. Yeah. Yeah, and
it's just turned into a Sparks show. Sorry, Jim.
I know, but what a great record! I love that record. I don't. It's hard for me to ever rate.
Yeah,
because my taste changed. I just wrote something about Geordie Walker for Guitar World, and I love Killing Joke, and I just went through their entire
Killing Joke. Yeah.
And what an underrated. Just the sounds that he made, the riffs that he did.
Yeah.
What just a incredible guitar player, and what a great bloke. I had some great interviews with him in the past.
There are some great books. I mean, Brad's book on MC5 with Jan Uhelski. Yeah. That's what I love about doing my podcast is I get to, it's the episodes on the bands that I know little to nothing about that I look forward to mostly because
MC5, Brad can give you the whole rundown, but there's so much you just kick out the jams. Most
Wayne Kramer. Yeah.
If they know anything about MC5, they know kick out the jams, and that's about it. But there's so much more to
music. Fred Smith is probably one of the best rhythm guitar players outside of Keith Richards of straight up rock and roll, from MC5. And their drummer Dennis Thompson, Machine Gun Thompson.
Yeah.
He was a monster. I mean, he was really one of the, like outside of Keith Moon, like one of the really great virtuosic, aggressive rock drummers from that era.
Really, strongly urge people buy that book.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not saying that because Brad's here. There it is. Yeah, man. And then I can plug the episode you were on Booked on Rock. That's what episode number 224. If anybody wants to check it out.
Any final thoughts here on the book?
Wrapping it up. Yeah,
I got one story for you that I put on my list. It's the crazy story of his dad losing his finger. Right.
Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah. So this is a wild story. The part I didn't know is that he went back and got the finger off the ground and then put it in a jar and they kept it in the closet or somewhere.
I love that. I love that.
I was like, what?
Oh no, but hey, that ties right in with Ed keeping that bit of his hip bone.
Yes, that's a crazy story.
Like it's
in a Ziploc bag or something, right?
And it would have been, hey, if somebody knew something about Van Halen to kind of tie that together and maybe mention, and then later when Ed had hip surgery, he kept his hip bone in the freezer.
Did you guys know about Alex's thumb thing? Like that influenced his sound when he was working at a factory. That
Yeah,
make note of it.
That's all new stuff. I mean, this is stuff. This is the stuff that, I mean, again, what the book is what it is, and but it's like I do wish, my wish list is that I wish we had more of that type of insight, that stuff that we haven't heard 100,000 times, because Brad and I sure have read our own book 100,000 times.
Yeah.
And we're still rereading that book 100,000 times.
It's a friggin' awesome
but
book,
it's like I'd really like more of that type of insight, that type of stuff. That Alex, you haven't done a ton of interviews, and tell us what you that you haven't told us before.
Yeah.
So
maybe
Al almost lost a finger working at a factory.
Yeah.
Numbness contributed to his sound. I put in my notes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of the way he held his hand or something, right? Muted the head a certain way.
And I think, didn't he describe it as like being comparable to Tony Iommi and what happened with his fingertips or something?
Yeah.
I believe, but it's like, but that's, that's good stuff. That's that, like I said, that early section of the book there, before we got into, even up to the recording of the first album, there was some real gold in there. And then it's just like, all of a sudden I'm kind of like, where's the gold? You kind of just, it seemed like it got fewer and far between them, got these wonderful, very passionate, very emotional interludes. And that brought me back into it.
Because I think that's really what Alex had in mind when he was doing this book, was talking about his brother's early days and his dad and his influence on him. And then, he loses a bit of interest. Although I do say that that's sort of what sustained me through the second half of the book, was seeing the evolution of his relationship with David Lee Roth.
Yeah.
Right. I agree.
And that was interesting, but it pulled away from the focus on Ed. I felt a little bit too much. There was passages there where I thought, what happened to Ed? It's like, I missed him, I mean, he goes on about Stina, which good, he should, because that's his wife and everything like that. And it's also partially Al's own personal narrative and his own story, and that's fine. But there were passages where it's like, where did Eddie go? Oh, he's off playing with Michael Jackson, he's out there, doing lines with Lukather or something. I don't know, but, that's whatever. But yeah, it was interesting. It was good to see that, and I mean, the book should be about Al too. This is Al's opportunity to tell his own story. Brad and I will come back to that. We wrote the book about Ed, and Ed was the focus. And there's really, there's not a whole lot of Al in that book, really, to be honest. It's really, Ed. So,
Yeah.
My Michael Jackson imitation.
Oh, that was Michael Jackson. Yes.
Jamona.
Yeah. Didn't Eddie do a bit of an impression too when he was talking about it? He's like,
yeah, I did.
And they did.
Sometimes I don't like to fact check things because of stories, but Ed had told me like, we didn't reach number one because Michael set his hair on fire doing the Pepsi commercial, and people felt sorry for him and bought his record. But the people were buying it before he set his hair on fire and after he set his hair on fire.
Yeah, it's just a great record.
It was a funny story though, so I had to.
Yeah.
But it wasn't true. But it is a different kind of truth.
Yes. If I had my final thoughts on it, or exactly, get both of these together, and you get the story,
Right.
Complete story.
Fantastic. You guys have been awesome today. Thank you for coming on, man. You guys are.
I don't envy your having to edit this thing at all.
I may not edit it. I may just put it up as it is. It may take about 2 days to load.
As a fellow podcaster, I was going to say, how long to upload after you
upload will be the problem.
Yeah,
it'll be 3% done by tomorrow.
You guys know me. I'm the Energizer Bunny when it comes to talking about Van Halen. So I was just talking last night, with Andrew, our buddy, my Kiwi brother from another mother.
Right.
That I did that tribute show, not this last one, but the one before that. I did the whole Jerry Lewis marathon telethon with him, where I was on the air with him for, and of course it was like overnight for me. It started at 9:00 at night and went until like 6 a.m. or something like that. But I held fast.
Wait, is it the 5150 show? Is that the one?
5150 show.
Yes, that was great. We put both. I think we put all of those up on the the news desk.
Yeah, but you guys can get me going. I can go on for hours about this stuff, you know. And
same here. It's nice to talk to somebody who's not getting annoyed by me talking about Van Halen for hours.
Well, unfortunately, I reach a point where my brain starts to just like go into like meltdown and stuff. So and I start to become, you know, a fact checking nightmare. So and I have to go back on the comments section and say like, oops.
Yeah.
I have to say real quick before we sign off that Eric, he fixes he's my editor whenever I write a story on the desk. Because I suck. I got terrible grammar. I'm dyslexic, and I send him who knows
Hey, great contribution to the website, because kind of going to what I was saying earlier, I come at it, Jeff comes at it from a fan perspective, Jeff Hausman and I. So to have the musicians/fans perspective is great, and you have such great content. So thank you for contributing, man. Absolutely. Yeah, and of course, it goes without saying, Brad and Chris, I mean, thank you guys for all your
Jeff, you do a lot of hard work, you know, because you go and track these guys down that don't have publicists and stuff like that, you know, and it's tough. I know how much legwork it takes to find like a Lauren Molinaire or someone like that. I mean, fortunately with social media, it's a little bit easier to find people.
Those stories are more interesting than the ones you may get with somebody, you know, more prominent. They have the stories that not a lot of people know about.
That's right. And you know, I have to give a lot of credit to Greg Renoff, because Greg, you know, he had that network built, you know, and Greg has always helped me with every bit of, you know, all of those guys that you see. A lot of that network started with Greg. I mean, there might be people that I've gotten to, but that network is Greg's network.
He pays it forward a lot. So, and we know Greg's watching this right now. So, hey, Greg.
Those are Greg and Ian Christie, you know, was like
the
voice that
CJ Chilvers, the Van Halen Encyclopedia.
Right.
Yeah. I do have my problem with some of that stuff, which I won't say. I mean, maybe get this out if we get to it, but you know, there's some stuff in the encyclopedia that is not right, and corrections need to be out. And he's adamant about stuff, you know. He's adamant about it. You can give him like, you know, what the LA prosecutors turned in on the, you know, the mountain of evidence that they turned in on OJ, and he'll still say OJ didn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'll say, Chris, if I think there was one time there was an article we put up, and you very respectfully just said, "Hey, that ain't right." I welcomed it, you know. So it's cool, you know. You know your shit.
Well, it's an ever evolving thing. I wouldn't be surprised if one day we do an updated version of Eruption.
Oh, that'd be great.
You know, with some of the things that we've learned.
There's not a whole lot. I mean,
there's not a whole lot. There's not a whole lot, but you know.
But there's some minor details that we have discovered. I mean, that's the thing. You know, Greg's book opened up the floodgates of these photographs, and I'm still discovering new photos that reveal stuff. You know, and it's part of it is yet you have to get past the point of saying that's a cool picture, and then saying like, what's that in the background? You know, or what's this or what that is. It's really fun for me, because it's like being a forensic investigator on a crime or something like that.
Right.
You know, but every picture tells a story. You know, and if you dig around, you'll find stuff. And that's why I, as much as I love doing interviews, like I said, the brain's a very weird organ, and people remember stuff differently. You know, sometimes you can be at the same event and get 3 different stories. It's Rashomon, you know, or whatever. You know, it's documents and photos and stuff can just bring out so much. I mean, there's a guy in Holland, I don't know if you've seen this, where he actually shows you the various houses at the Van Halens, the Van Halens. That's how I learned how to say it, probably the Van Halen in Nijmegen, you know, and
where they lived.
Some guy just came out of the woodwork to me on my Instagram and sent me a thing saying, "Hey, the Van Halen childhood home is for sale." And I'm looking at it and going, "This isn't the place that I know," and everything. And that led me down this path to this guy over in Holland, you know, in the Netherlands, who went to the public works and dug up all the old paperwork, you know, and had this thing. It's like, okay, when Ed was born, he lived here, and they lived there for a couple months, and then they moved to this other place, this kind of apartment building in Nijmegen, and they lived there from, I forgot what it was, like something like November of 1955 all the way up until they left for the United States. So Jeff, you know, we were talking about that photo that they have that you saw on the wall that Wolfgang put up of 5150 of the childhood home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's actually not the childhood home. And this guy, even in this video, says this has been put out as the picture of the Van Halen childhood home, and it's actually this place, and he has all the documents, and he lives there. So he goes around and he shows you this stuff.
Wow.
And like they lived in a different house even before that when Alex was born.
Right.
So they moved around from a couple places, but this place in Nijmegen that they lived in for the bulk of their childhood, that was the childhood home that they lived in. That wasn't where they lived when Ed was born or when Alex was born. It was fascinating.
We had always heard that they were in Amsterdam at one point, like early on, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I've always heard, that Amsterdam, then they went out to Nijmegen, and then they came to the U.S., right? That's kind of the pathway.
Yeah, but this guy, it's like I'll send you a link. I've got it. I'll send you, Jeff. I'll send you a link to it because it's really kind of cool to see. And I think it's kind of been. I don't think many people really know about it because it's some Dutch guy. You know
what you reminded me of is somebody brought this up. I think it was Holly brought this up to me. This guy over there pointed out that
Jeff, I know it's on the Van Halen Bros thing, our little conversation. If you go back, of course, I'll just send it to you because you had to dig through so much stuff.
No, I saw those pictures. I saw the pictures you're talking about.
I saw the pictures. There's also, I also sent a link to the YouTube thing, though, that video, but I'll send it to you separately anyways.
Okay. The coordinates for Amsterdam are 5150. Did you guys know that?
I did not know that.
Wow. I didn't know it was real, and I went and looked.
I wonder if they know that.
I don't know, but
I bet you they do.
Holly sent it to me from a guy that was over in the Amsterdam, and I went and re-looked it up. I was like, no kidding.
Wow, yeah, interesting.
Look it up.
But I bet
they
may know that now, but I bet they didn't know that at the time.
Right. Yeah, it's weird though. It's kind of a strange fact, but I was like, this can't be real, right? This can't be.
Weird stuff happens. I can tell you. I don't know how many. Jeff. I know you're into like you're seeing stuff and numerical stuff and all that, but I kind of have that similar things happen where it's just like some number will pop up out of the blue or something will happen. Or
you see that last week where I was playing and Jump randomly started on me.
No, I didn't see that.
We were playing. I was telling the band about how pissed Alex was about Beat It, right?
Right.
But we played Beat It. Jump's not on the list for a while. We're about to start Missing You. I got and it just Jump starts randomly.
Wow, how weird.
Wow. I was like, that's kind of weird.
A very most recent thing, and this is kind of a weird little serendipity thing.
Yeah.
But, we're going through this whole thing. We're in the midst of this, our upset feelings that we have about our stuff, not being properly accredited,
right,
and everything. And I'm just like, we're going into the weekend, and I'm talking with my wife about it, and just saying like, well, gosh, Alex, you're going to get yours when you try to make this biopic, because if you want to tell the real story and everything like that, guess what, Alex? It ain't going to happen because Hollywood, I'm sure that Brian May and Roger Taylor and whoever was involved in Bohemian Rhapsody just sucked it up because they just got a shit ton of money. And they knew that they were going to sell a shit ton of records. So they just sucked it up and they just they weren't me. They let the factual stuff slide. But I know Alex has got his own thing about, setting the record straight and everything like that. And this is the way it should be. And if you go to Hollywood, that ain't going to happen. You're going to be a 12-year-old black child from Gambia, or whatever. And it's just like, Alex, you're up for a rude awakening. And then it reminded me of the movie The Player and the wonderful scene at the end with Richard E. Grant, where he's like, in halfway through the movie, he pitches this story and it's about this prison execution and everything. And the woman dies at the end because that's reality, no stars, no, because that's reality, and I was just thinking about that with my wife, because at the very end, it ends up like Bruce Willis rescuing Julia Roberts from the gas chamber and everything like that. And this one chick who's me, basically, in the movie, goes up and says, what happened? What happened to the real story? What happened to the no actors? And Richard E. Grant sits back and goes like, because we did a screening in Canoga Park and it bombed. So we went back and we changed the ending. And that's reality. So anyways, I'm watching The Player last Saturday, and I watch it every now and then from time to time. And there's a moment in the film that whenever I see it, I'm like, oh shit. And I always forget about it a couple of weeks later and everything. Okay. Tim Robbins plays this kind of an asshole studio executive, and he keeps on getting these death threats. on postcards. And he's like, it's getting to him. He's like, it's bothering him. He's like, he's trying to think like, who did I not get back to? And he's going to send me this stuff. So he thinks it's this one guy, and he goes and finds out that he's at South Pasadena at the Rialto Theater, where I used to drive by that almost every day when I lived out there. He goes out to see the bicycle thief, and he goes and he finds this writer, and talks to him, chases him down after the film. They go to a karaoke bar and get drunk. And then in the middle, the guy gets pissed off because Tim Robbins is like, oh, because he talks about, the writer talks about, I spent a year in Japan or whatever. And Tim Robbins is like, oh, you should write about that. And the guy's like, I did write about that. That was the script that I sent you, asshole. And he gets up, pissed off, and he leaves and everything like that. And so Tim Robbins goes chasing after him. And the writer goes into the alley to go get his car. And on the wall is a Van Halen For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge poster. Whoa. And every time I see it, it just sticks out like a sore thumb.
I love it.
It's the Van Halen logo.
Yeah.
And what happens immediately after that? The studio executive murders the writer. And I'm watching that, and it comes to that scene, and I look at my wife and go, like, is the world trying to tell me something?
Yeah. Oh, man.
I'm low.
Serendipity, man.
Yeah, right on. I tell you what, man, it's crazy. Thank you guys for all coming today, and I'll see if I can get this uploaded in a week.
Cool.
It's good. Yeah, you're gonna have to leave your computer on.
It's a marathon. You're gonna have to break this up into separate parts, I think. So.
Probably. I mean, my YouTube connection is probably not that good.
Oh, boy.
This was great, man. Thanks so much. I feel I'm not worthy being on this panel.
Thank you, man.
No, it's a blast. And it's good to do stuff with you again, Brad. We haven't done this in a while. So
right on.
No, yeah.
This is going to spark the next version.
Getting the band back together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we do see that. You guys get to work.
Yeah.
I'm too busy writing my new book about Chris Gill called Brothers.
Brothers from Another Mother. Call it get the story straight.
But the thing is, it's not called Brothers, it's called Brothers.
Well,
I was born a 12-year-old black child in Gambia.
Well, if you haven't got Chris and Brad's book, you get their book and get it. I got it on audio this time, and that's an awesome way to listen. Same thing with the Alex book. I did that, because he reads it.
I think I have not heard the Alex book, but I've talked with people who have heard it, and I get an entirely different perspective.
It's really cool. Yeah, I listened to it. To it, and I love it. His laugh.
Oh yeah, it always reminds me so much of Ed. Just that same.
Yeah.
It's so uncanny, that Brothers thing.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. You guys get some food, huh?
Thank you.
Y'all have a good day.
Thanks, fellas. Thank you for having us on. Eric, good to see you again. Jeff.
Good to see you guys.
See you guys.
Cheers.
Have a good one.
You too.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.